My name is Mia. I'm in my 50s, living alone since my husband passed away from a heart attack a few years ago. My son, Mason, got married and moved out. While I don't want him to live with me, I do feel lonely sometimes. Part of the reason I didn't want him to stay was because I've seen how difficult relationships between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law can be. My own mother was harassed, and it made me cautious. I wasn't very close to my grandmother either, so I understand family conflicts well. To be honest, I don't get along with Mason's wife, Emily. She often speaks in a way that feels superior, and I felt we weren't a good match. Here's what happened the first time I met her. During a family meeting, Mason introduced her. "This is my fiancée, Emily. Isn't she beautiful, Mom?" he said. "Nice to meet you, Emily," I replied politely. "I'm glad Mason is getting married. Let's have coffee and chat." Emily smiled and said, "Thank you," as I offered some snacks. I brought out a cheesecake I'd made. "Did you make this, Mia?" Emily asked. "Yes, it's my signature cheesecake. I hope you like it," I replied. Emily took a bite and frowned. "Handmade sweets seem so poor," she said. Then, she laughed. Mason joined in, saying, "Mom loves making everything by hand. It's kind of funny." I was stunned. I'd always loved baking and had fed Mason homemade food when he was young. Had he always thought this way? Emily even spit out the cheesecake she'd tasted and laughed again. It was hurtful and rude. Emily, according to Mason, comes from a good family, but her words and actions are often unpleasant. Since their wedding, she always makes sarcastic remarks whenever we meet, which is exhausting. I also don't get along with her parents. Emily's mother, Elizabeth, looks down on me for working at my age. She once said, "It must be tough still working in your 50s. I guess you're not getting much survivor benefits since your husband passed away." I tried to keep calm and responded, "I enjoy working." Elizabeth smirked and continued, "Women are happiest when they're housewives. Working mothers like you probably couldn't give Mason much love." I replied, "That's not true. I loved Mason dearly." But she dismissed me, saying, "Working mothers always cut corners." I'm glad Emily is a proper housewife now. Women should quit their jobs and focus on the household. Elizabeth, though the same age as me, has very old-fashioned views. It's not wrong to be a housewife, but the way she judges others' lifestyles as if she's an expert is annoying. Her husband, Logan, also acts like he's above everyone else, being the president of a mid-sized company. Overall, dealing with Emily and her family has been a tiring experience. I wish Elizabeth would just mind her own business. Somehow, I ended up agreeing to go on a trip with Emily's annoying parents, which has left me confused. It's the year-end holidays, and I had some time off work. Out of the blue, Elizabeth called and invited me on the trip. To make it more awkward, they had already booked a luxury hotel and airline tickets, so I felt like I had no choice but to go along with it. On the day of the trip, I arrived at the airport terminal just before the scheduled 10 a.m. meeting time. Soon, Mason, Emily, Logan, and Elizabeth arrived, carrying large bags. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. "I feel a bit guilty, though." Elizabeth waved it off. "Oh, don't mention it. Let's board. Here are the tickets we bought in advance." She handed tickets to everyone, except me. "Oh, sorry, Mia," she said casually. "I forgot to buy your airplane ticket. You'll have to get there by boat. It'll take 10 hours. "What?" I exclaimed, shocked. Emily laughed. "Mom, making Mia take a boat is hilarious. It suits her." Mason added, "We'll wait for you in Los Angeles." I was stunned. "Are you guys really okay with this? You're just leaving me behind?" Elizabeth shrugged. "We won't have any issues. Just remember, if your back hurts from the boat ride, that's not our problem. See you there." As they walked through the gate laughing, I stood there alone, gripping my phone in anger. Why did I have to endure such cruelty? I'd hoped this trip would be a chance to get along better with everyone, but instead, I was being treated like a fool. No, the truth is, I'd been foolish to believe they had good intentions in the first place. I realized Logan and Elizabeth must have planned to bully and exclude me from the beginning. I was furious and thought, I won't let this slide. I'll get back at them and make sure they can't retaliate. Muttering to myself, I must have looked like an angry old lady as I walked home, my face tight with frustration. When I got home, I put my phone aside, quickly finished some work, and took a short nap. After I woke up, I noticed my phone was flooded with WhatsApp notifications. Curious, I checked, and all the messages were from Elizabeth. I'd turned off notifications while sleeping, so I hadn't noticed them earlier. When I called her back, Elizabeth answered, furious. How dare you do that to me, she yelled. What are you talking about? I replied. Don't act innocent. You uploaded that conversation online, didn't you? Oh, you mean the short video? Yeah, it's going viral. It's even trending on major forums now, I said calmly. What did you just say? Elizabeth was outraged. There's even a thread calling me the evil witch aunt, and it's already up to part 10. Where do they get off calling me that? I'm a classy and refined lady. You didn't realize you were mean? That's the real issue here, I said flatly. Elizabeth continued her rant. Thanks to you, I've been bombarded with messages from friends who saw that video. It's ruining my vacation. Oh, is that so? I replied, feigning concern. But let's be clear, the one at fault here is you, Elizabeth. I just uploaded the audio. And no, it wasn't illegal or anything. Elizabeth was furious. You're the real evil witch. You're just jealous, because you're not as wealthy as I am. You envy everything about me, don't you? I kept calm. Actually, I'm not envious at all. But Elizabeth, you're the one being deceived by Logan. She paused, shocked. What do you mean? She demanded. My late husband cherished me deeply, but Logan? He has someone more important to him than you. What are you talking about? His affair partner, I said bluntly. What? Elizabeth's voice wavered. The real reason for this trip was so Logan could secretly meet a woman there, I explained. Elizabeth was speechless. I knew about Logan's affair because the woman had posted videos with him on a site I often browse. She appeared to be in her late 20s, not much older than their daughter, Emily. It was disturbing to see such a relationship. While I couldn't post explicit details online, the linked blog painted a clear picture. It was full of entries describing their time together, explicitly and shamelessly. I sent the blog link to Elizabeth. Go ahead, read it, I said. Elizabeth opened the link, and soon I could hear her screaming in horror. It was almost unbearable. Apparently, Logan had told her he was taking a short walk, but instead, he'd gone to meet the woman. While Elizabeth was still on the phone with me, Logan returned to the hotel room. Oh, what a lovely view I just saw on my walk, Logan said casually. Elizabeth snapped. Where were you? Were you really just walking alone? Yes, of course. Did you want to come next time? Logan said nervously. Don't lie to me. What's this diary I'm reading? You were with the woman who wrote it, weren't you? Well, Logan stammered. Explain yourself, Elizabeth shouted. Why is your affair partner here? Look, it's not what it seems. I met her during a business trip. We had drinks, and we got friendly, but it's nothing serious. Logan tried to defend himself. Nothing serious? This diary says otherwise. You're disgusting, Elizabeth yelled. Then Logan blurted out something shocking. Well, Mason did the same thing. Wait, what? Elizabeth froze. Logan suddenly spilled the beans. Mason was at the bar with me, drinking and flirting with women. After that, we both went to that kind of place. Elizabeth was shocked. What did you just say, Mason? What does this mean? Emily turned to Mason, furious. Is this true? Mason tried to defend himself. Emily, calm down. I didn't do anything. I was just drinking with a woman. That's all. Logan smirked. Oh no, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Mason panicked. Why are you dragging me into this? I'm your son-in-law. Defend me. Logan shot back. Shut up. This is all your mother's fault. Emily was devastated. Mason, I thought we were happy, and now I find out you've been lying to me? It turned out Logan and Mason's companies had a business relationship, so they often spent time together. However, their business trips were more than they seemed. During one trip, both companies had run into trouble and had to apologize to a client. Conveniently, the client was located in the same area as their vacation spot. After handling the apology, Logan and Mason decided to drink, flirt with women, and have secret relationships. This wasn't a one-time thing, they'd been visiting privately multiple times. Emily's voice shook with anger. So when you two said you were surfing and snorkeling together, that was a lie? Mason looked cornered. Well, what about the mountain climbing? Emily pressed. That was a lie too, Mason admitted. Emily exploded. This is too much. I can't believe this. Mason tried to shift the blame. See, I didn't do anything worse than Logan. Logan laughed. Oh, Mason, we both know what you've done. Don't make me spill all the details. Mason begged. Please don't say anything more. I was shocked. Mason wasn't just my son-in-law, but someone Logan seemed to admire. To think they'd both been going there repeatedly to meet women disgusted me. Even this supposed family vacation to Los Angeles was just a cover to meet their mistresses. The thought made me sick. Realizing how much of a fool I'd been for trusting these people, I felt pathetic, but before I could process it further, Elizabeth started yelling on the phone again. "This mess is your fault, Mia. Apologize." "No," I replied firmly, "I won't apologize." Elizabeth was furious. "You're just jealous, because you're poor. You're trying to ruin my family. You're a demon." I snapped back. "If anyone's a demon, it's you, Elizabeth. Haven't you been flirting with a young man yourself?" Elizabeth faltered. "What? That's ridiculous. One of your employees told me you approached him and," I trailed off, letting her panic set in. Elizabeth was shocked when I revealed the truth. "Wait, your company's employee? What do you mean?" she stammered. "Yes," I replied calmly, "I'm the CEO of XX Foods. You may have thought I was just a part-timer, but I actually run the place." Elizabeth gasped. "The famous XX Foods? You're the CEO?" "Yes, I worked my way up and now lead the company. I'm far from struggling, and I certainly don't envy you, especially not after what you did to one of my employees." Elizabeth's face turned pale. "I didn't do anything wrong." I crossed my arms. "Really? You approached him while he was cleaning the entrance and made him deeply uncomfortable. He told me what you did, and frankly, it was completely inappropriate." Elizabeth began to panic. "Oh no. I'll apologize, please. I swear it won't happen again." "It's not up to me to forgive you," I said coldly. "That's up to my employee." Elizabeth had been harassing Alexander, a young man on cleaning duty at my company. She would show up every Monday when he was scheduled and behave inappropriately toward him. Alexander didn't know how to respond since she was an older woman and feared any reaction might backfire. The stress eventually took a toll on him, and he went on leave. When Alexander emailed me photos and explained the situation, I was furious. I decided to act. With Alexander's consent, I forwarded his photos and story to Logan via WhatsApp. Chaos erupted. Logan shouted at Elizabeth, "What were you thinking, going after a younger man? You're a disgrace." Elizabeth tried to deflect. "It wasn't just me, he had a part in it too." Logan didn't buy it. "Stop lying, you're nothing but a creepy old stalker." But Elizabeth fired back. "Oh, you're one to talk. You've been having an affair too, and don't forget, you owe me hundreds of thousands in alimony." Logan smirked. "You're not getting a dime from me. I don't need you either." Elizabeth snapped. "Wait, Emily, don't call me that," Logan growled, cutting her off. What followed was a massive argument at the luxury hotel in Los Angeles. Eventually, Logan and Elizabeth divorced. Logan had been unfaithful, so Elizabeth received alimony. However, she didn't get to keep it for long. Alexander sued her for harassment and won damages, which essentially meant Elizabeth had to use her alimony to pay him. Later, Elizabeth came to me, asking for a job. "Please, I need work," she pleaded. I refused. "I don't need someone like you causing trouble." As for my family, my son divorced Emily after it came to light she was pregnant, but not with his child. Their relationship was a mess, and my son's actions disappointed me deeply. I wondered where I went wrong raising him, but I reminded myself he was an adult and responsible for his own choices. Now that I've had my revenge, I'm ready to focus entirely on my work as a CEO. The future is mine to shape.
If you wish, we can consider divorce, but I'd like to continue living with our son. Despite John berating me extensively, he looked satisfied as he took a deep breath. I pondered how to respond, and our son, who had been waiting in the background, stepped forward. "Dad, if you don't know, let me tell you," our son said, pointing at his father's mistress. His words made me break into a cheeky smile. "My name is Jennifer. I turned 42 this year, currently working as a freelance illustrator. We've been married for 15 years, and we have a son in 8th grade. Throughout our marriage, John has jumped from job to job, not lasting very long. Most of our income comes from my work as I balance housework, raising our child, and my job. Working from home became a necessity as John took sporadic short-term jobs. Despite being a newbie in the freelance world initially, my efforts resulted in a stable income and consistent work. Referrals from former clients led to new projects, and I now illustrate educational magazines and brochures. With David growing up, I managed to work from home and go out for work a few times a week. The three of us lived harmoniously, but John's lack of direction troubled me. At 44, he seemed content with his aimless life, rarely working full-time. Despite having free time, he didn't contribute much to housework or child raising. John's disinterest in our son David, who was entering his challenging teenage years, frustrated me. David, although not very talkative, occasionally helped with chores without being asked. However, John showed no interest in our son and rarely assisted with household responsibilities. Lately, John had been coming home late more often, and I couldn't shake off my unease and frustration. Even on days when he claimed to be working, I suspected he might be doing something else. His sudden interest in picking up and dropping off David at his basketball club raised suspicions, as it contradicted our household rule of always having a parent handle these tasks. While I appreciated the help, something felt off, and my suspicions started to crystallize over the past few months. As I passed by the place where David goes, I decided to take a different route home for a change of scenery. While shopping near David's facility, I unexpectedly spotted John, who wasn't supposed to be there. He had claimed he'd be late tonight due to out-of-town work. To my surprise, he was chatting happily with a woman who appeared to be one of the staff members from the basketball facility. A sense of unease washed over me as I observed the two of them. The woman noticed me and tilted her head, asking, "Excuse me, are you David's mom?" I reluctantly confirmed, and she thanked me for my son being in her care. Awkwardly nodding, I engaged in small talk with her, curious about her role at the facility. Ignoring my husband, who seemed rigid and tense, I attempted to gather information. The woman introduced herself as Jessica, but I couldn't help but wonder why she didn't provide more details about her role with David. Ignoring my puzzled expression, my husband seemed eager to end their conversation. On the way home, we didn't speak, and he deliberately avoided eye contact, appearing distant. His recent late returns and eagerness to handle drop-offs and pickups, combined with his strange behavior after being spotted, fueled my suspicions. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica had something to do with it. As we walked home, I wondered if he was having an affair with this younger woman. In my heart, I sensed a change since he began doing the drop-offs and pickups. He had become noticeably distant, and when I inquired about his behavior, our son responded curtly, displaying annoyance. Chasing after our reluctant son and forcing him to the facility every day felt wrong. My suspicions grew, and soon they were confirmed. One day, as I casually dropped by, Jessica found excuses to visit our home more frequently. While she mentioned our son, it became clear that it was just a pretext. She always appeared when my husband was home, not me or our son. Watching them cheerfully converse in the living room, I was certain of John's infidelity. A month after noticing odd behavior, my husband began coming home later and occasionally leaving for days. When I jokingly remarked about his late return, suggesting he spare me the cheating, he abruptly stood up and glared at me. "Just stick to your work. I'm taking care of David, so don't pry into it unnecessarily," he retorted before leaving the living room with a sigh. I seethed with anger at being told as if he was handling everything, when in reality, he had left all the housework and the responsibility of taking care of David to me. My frustration surfaced during one of our petty disputes, and David, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "What's the matter, Mom?" David questioned, having noticed the tension. Trying to downplay it, I asked about him and why he was up at that hour. David, stepping out of his room, stared at me before hesitantly sharing his observations about a female staff member he suspected to be his father's mistress. According to David, this woman, Jessica, would frequently approach him at the facility, annoying him with her clinginess. He felt frustrated that she had started coming to our house, a sentiment I shared. It was evident that my son disliked having someone from his basketball club imposing on our home, providing me with a sense of relief. However, the problem persisted. Returning home from a client meeting, I heard cheerful conversation in the living room, the voices of John and Jessica. David was noticeably absent, holed up in his room. Upon entering the living room, both John and Jessica turned their eyes toward me. Jessica, with unwavering confidence, greeted me. "Welcome back, David's mom." I ran into John, so he invited me in, Jessica said, addressing my husband by his name, a fact that deeply unsettled me. Attempting sarcasm, I inquired about her frequent meetings with John, to which she responded with a smug face, claiming it was part of her job. Her audacity continued as she pointed out the deficiencies in my housekeeping, expressing that the house felt cozy but lacked thorough cleaning. My husband didn't rebuff her comments and even chuckled along, seemingly siding with Jessica. Although I worked from home, I felt self-conscious about not keeping up with housework. However, if he contributed more to chores and childcare, it wouldn't be an issue. Feeling mocked and ridiculed, unable to bear the tension, I hastily left the living room for the bedroom, still holding my belongings. Frustration, sadness, and embarrassment overwhelmed me. I feared that Jessica might eventually take over my place in the family. Even after that encounter, my husband and Jessica continued their outings, displaying their relationship in front of me, leaving me speechless. I later learned from others that they often met under the guise of discussing my son's education, further deepening my sense of betrayal. Realizing the need for evidence during my husband's frequent absences, I embarked on a search that uncovered undeniable proof of his infidelity. Despite his claims that we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or anniversaries, I stumbled upon receipts from motels, upscale restaurants, and high-end watches and jewelry in his coat pocket. Even places he insisted were beyond our financial reach had receipts, suggesting he frequented them with his mistress, not his wife. While the pain of his actions cut deep, I maintained composure and continued accumulating evidence of his affairs. Though divorce crossed my mind, I resolved to endure until David graduated from high school. Yet I vowed to gather sufficient evidence to secure a favorable position if the time for separation came. The question lingered. Where was the money for his affair coming from? As I pondered, I remembered our house's savings account for my son's college fund. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the transactions, revealing substantial withdrawals over the past few months. Shockingly, the balance had significantly decreased. The money meant for our son's education was being used for his selfish needs. The betrayal against our child overshadowed the betrayal against me as his wife. Suppressing my anger, I chose to act normal, not wanting our impressionable son to sense the brewing storm. I carried the burdens alone, trying not to burden our son who was studying diligently. However, stress took its toll, leading to small mistakes in household chores and at work. Even longtime client Mrs. Smith noticed my worn-out state, expressing concern and offering comfort. While I struggled, my husband reveled in his affair, seemingly more relaxed without my interference. Eventually, our son, David, would inevitably confront the issues within our family. Observing my downtrodden demeanor, David silently approached to help with household tasks. "I kind of know what's going on, huh?" he said, folding laundry. "Do whatever you want to do, Mom. You don't have to worry about me." His thoughtful actions, though sparing in words, warmed my heart and intensified my anger toward the traitor who touched the money reserved for our son's future. Retribution for this betrayal became a necessity. Contemplating whether to reach out to the person who had promised support, I weighed the options before me. With clenched fists, I vowed vengeance on my husband and his mistress. One evening, he suddenly announced a week-long work trip for training in another state. However, skepticism arose. The restaurant chain he worked for operated solely within our state, with no offices outside. His earlier boast about the job's perks included not having to relocate out of state. When my son casually mentioned a staff member from his club taking a week off, my husband's startled expression raised suspicions. Despite his initial pride in discussing the intense training, he grew silent and stared anxiously at his smartphone. Since confirming his infidelity, I had been monitoring both him and Jessica. A private investigator revealed that Jessica, working at the basketball facility, also had a week off. Aware that their business trip was a cover for a romantic getaway, I refrained from catching them red-handed, opting for a more strategic plan. Having planned something since discovering their intentions, I coordinated with my son, who was now on board. On the day of their trip, I bid farewell to my unsuspecting husband. My son and I, aided by relatives, began cleaning and packing. The plan was to move out while he was away and stay elsewhere until finding a new home. Supported by relatives angered by his actions yet concerned for David. To prevent my husband's access to our savings account, I transferred the remaining money to my personal account. While making preparations, I couldn't leave his belongings behind and decided to send them to a specific location with Mrs. Smith's consent. A few days after moving, my phone rang with my husband in a panic, requesting money during his supposed training. Declining, I confronted him about the account he usually withdrew from. The frantic voice of Jessica in the background signaled their financial desperation. The next day, my son and I headed to a specific location, a magnificent mansion with a well-maintained garden. Inside, we found my cheating husband and his mistress sitting on the floor, apologizing to Mrs. Smith. She, with a stern expression, was not just a longtime client, but also the principal of the middle school attended by my son, forging a close relationship over the years. We confide in each other with our personal troubles. I'm deeply sorry for the trouble caused by my husband. In truth, it's my daughter's fault that all of this happened. It turned out that Jessica, who was on a trip with my husband, was questioned by her parents about a package she received at home and had no choice but to return immediately. Naturally, she insisted that my husband accompany her. Upon hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband began to shake in fear. Mrs. Smith had always been concerned about my declining health after learning about John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair and she discovered that the mistress was her daughter, she was utterly devastated. Despite this, Mrs. Smith wanted to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. Pointing at the piles of boxes, she sternly reprimanded her daughter, expressing her disappointment. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always wanting what isn't yours," Mrs. Smith scolded her daughter sternly. Her daughter attempted to defend herself, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but Mrs. Smith wouldn't hear it. She insisted on an apology, promising consequences for her daughter's actions. Ignoring Jessica's hysterics, I turned my attention to my silent husband standing beside her. "Don't you have something to say to me?" I asked sharply, prompting David, who had been standing behind me, to step forward. "She's not a regular staff there, just an intern at the club," David interjected firmly, addressing Jessica directly. "And don't you ever try to get all chummy with me again. Always flirting with men. It's disgusting." As my son spoke, it became clear that Jessica hadn't been officially hired at the club, contrary to my husband's belief. He had thought she was experienced in student education or activities, which was laughable considering her actual status. Their exchange revealed hidden truths, and as I looked at the stunned Jessica, it seemed that they both had their secrets. Before leaving, I felt compelled to offer Jessica a piece of advice. "Did you know that I pay for the rent, living expenses, and even David's tuition fees? This man, John, has been working odd jobs for years. You think he's okay?" Jen, with a face drained of color, attempted to interject, but it was too late. Jessica was so shocked by the revelation that she collapsed on the spot. From what I could tell, John had been acting as if he had plenty of money to spare, hiding the fact that I was the breadwinner of the family to save face in Jessica's eyes. I seemed like a lazy bum who neither worked nor took care of household chores properly. Mrs. Smith was left devastated, facing the harsh reality presented by my husband and Jessica. After David and I happily returned home, it appeared that John was kicked out of Mrs. Smith's house. Looking defeated with Jessica and a load of stuff, months passed since the move. On Mrs. Smith's advice, I decided to leave my divorce process to a competent lawyer. Thanks to professional assistance, all the complicated procedures went smoothly, bringing me relief. I heard that the savings I had set aside for David's education could also be added to the claim as child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her affair with a student's parent, leading to her dismissal from the job. Seeking help from her parents, Jessica found Mrs. Smith unwilling to assist, leaving her lost and confused. Despising the man without money, she spat out words of disdain and abandoned John. Despite John's attempts at reconciliation, neither David nor I were willing to agree. Mrs. Smith felt terribly guilty for her daughter's role in ruining a family. I held the downcast principal's hand and said, "Let's keep working together." I'm truly grateful for the principal, thanks to whom I found a new job. Work has been going smoothly, and life with just David and me is filled with hope. David's joyful smile touched my heart as he casually expressed, "The job you do, Mom, is really amazing. You're the mom I'm proud of." Looking at a magazine featuring my illustrations, I discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. I want to keep pursuing my career as an illustrator, but above all, I want to work even harder for my precious David. I'm Karen, age 27, and my husband Stephen is also 27. We tied the knot just last year, both juggling full-time jobs. I work as a nurse, and Stephen is in pharmaceutical sales. Our paths had crossed before, but it was at a coworker's happy hour event that we truly connected. Being a fan of good drinks, the after-work cocktails that evening were especially delightful. Though we had encountered each other previously, that night marked the first time we engaged in meaningful conversation. Our drink preferences aligned, and we hit it off effortlessly. Each encounter thereafter was enjoyable and easy, quickly leading us into a dating relationship. On my birthday, Stephen opened up about his feelings, and we officially became a couple. Our favorite dates revolve around discovering hidden gems that offer excellent drinks. I'm partial to wine, while Stephen leans towards sake. Our differing tastes add a fun dynamic, allowing us to share and learn new things from one another. As our relationship progressed, thoughts of marriage started to occupy my mind. It was during this time that I delved into Stephen's background. His parents had divorced when he was young, and he never knew his father, being raised by his single mom with whom he shares a close bond. Stephen has never moved out of his family home. Initially, I questioned whether this was a flaw or a testament to his strong family values. Love often clouds judgment, and at that point, I viewed it as a positive trait. Stephen is not only kind but incredibly handsome, and I struggled to find any flaws. Feeling fortunate to be married to the seemingly perfect man, I was unaware of the daunting married life that awaited me. Before our wedding, I frequently shared meals with my mother-in-law, who always spoke highly of me to Stephen, saying, "Karen is like a daughter to me. Don't let her get away, marry her soon." Hearing those words always brought me joy, and I eagerly anticipated officially becoming part of the family. Steve, who had a knack for connecting with people, also had an excellent reputation with my parents. The wedding went off without a hitch, reflecting our shared preference for avoiding the limelight. Post-wedding, Stephen made the significant move out of his family home for the first time. However, out of concern for his mom, we opted for an apartment just a 10-minute walk from his family residence. In hindsight, that choice proved to be a mistake, but regrets come too late. The dynamic with my mother-in-law shifted drastically after the wedding. Once treating me like a daughter, she transformed into someone who seemed to view me as a mortal enemy, visiting our home daily. With care, I approached Stephen, expressing, "I appreciate your mom's visits, but it's challenging for me to relax. Could you ask her to come less frequently on workdays?" Stephen's response was unexpected, as he asserted, "Why? We're family now. Mom gets lonely, she loves to talk, and she hates being alone. I wish she would be more understanding. This is my home too, and I can't convey something I don't believe. If you have something to say it yourself. I won't." It was a surprising turn, and Stephen's refusal to consider my perspective left me taken aback. From that day forward, any mention of his mother made Stephen moody, prompting me to withhold my thoughts to avoid further arguments. My mother-in-law took advantage of the situation, and before I realized it, Stephen had given her a spare key. One day, I returned home to find my mother-in-law cooking in our kitchen without permission. Surprised to discover her in my personal space, my tone turned assertive. "What are you doing, mother-in-law? You can't just come in here without asking," she retorted. "What's going on with your fridge? It's practically empty. I have never seen such a lifeless fridge. Do you even cook? Don't tell me you're always buying deli items." Unable to hold back any longer, I responded, "I shop for fresh ingredients daily. I've heard your fridge is always packed like a traffic jam. It's impressive you can manage that. I just bought ingredients today. Sure, we have deli days, but I also cook to save money. And by the way, deli food these days is pretty good. Haven't you ever tried it?" Mother-in-law wasn't backing down. "I'll listen to you. I would rather not have Stephen eat food when we don't even know who made it. This is what happens when he marries an incompetent wife. I should have taught him to be more discerning about women." Sparks ignited between us, and once I began expressing my grievances, words poured out uncontrollably. "Do you see the shopping bag, mother-in-law? Not a single deli item in it. I'm busy, so could you please not get in my way? You're not even a guest anymore. You let yourself in." Mother-in-law stormed out, her face flushed with anger. "I'll tell Stephen about this." I had more to say, but she left. Despite feeling uncomfortable, I knew I was justified. Shaking off the negative vibes, I focused on cooking pot roast. When Stephen returned home, his face mirrored his mother's anger. "What'd you say to Mom? She called me crying. How could you be so cruel when she was just trying to help because you're busy?" Baffled, I responded, "First off, breaking into someone's home isn't a surprise. And if it is, then a burglar should be forgiven if they call it a surprise, right? This happened because you gave her a spare key. She could have come when one of us was home. It's not only unnecessary, but also intrusive. What about my privacy? I have no intention of apologizing." Stephen looked shocked and with a single word said, "Please. Can you two just get along?" He retreated to his room without eating dinner. Hoping this dispute would make him more considerate, I endured days of minimal communication. Unable to bear the tension, I initiated a conversation saying, "What do you want to do going forward? I don't want a relationship where we don't communicate. Let's talk." Finally, Stephen spoke up, saying, "Mom's remorseful. She was crying yesterday, worried you would never forgive her. The root cause was me giving her the spare key. I'm sorry, Karen. I didn't care about mother-in-law as long as Stephen understood. That was enough. My weakness showed, and I forgave him, even though I knew in the back of my mind, my fault is that I forgive." Stephen promptly called his mother, who eagerly came running, visibly relieved to be summoned. Exhausted from the ongoing conflict, I harbored a bad feeling but was willing to give peace a chance. As soon as mother-in-law saw my face, it was as if a switch had been turned on. "Oh, I'm so relieved. I thought Karen would never speak to me again. I know I overstepped, and I promised never to do it again." Mother-in-law began speaking in a voice as sweet as if she were addressing a cat. Despite my reservations, she pulled out a mysterious bag from her purse. "I met an old friend from college yesterday. She's unbelievably youthful and beautiful. She gave me some Chinese tea. That's her beauty secret. I thought I'd share some with you, not that you need it." My instincts raised concern, but I felt awkward refusing. Stephen whispered, "Just have 1 cup of tea with her. I'll make sure she leaves as soon as possible." Wanting her gone, I reluctantly agreed to the tea. I'd always enjoyed Chinese tea, and it's popular at my workplace too. Mother-in-law quickly poured hot water into the tea pack. "This tea is supposed to be good for your skin and boost female hormones. You guys are thinking about having kids soon, right? If you like it, I'll tell my friend to get some for you," she said, placing the cup in front of me. The aroma was a bit unusual, but I took a sip anyway. It tasted strange, but I dismissed it, thinking it was just a new flavor. However, my bad feeling came true. I woke up in the middle of the night with stomach pain, feeling half faint. By the time I felt better, it was already morning. There was no doubt about it. The only thing I had consumed that Stephen hadn't was the suspicious Chinese tea. I told Stephen about it, but he didn't take me seriously. Karen, that's a terrible accusation. Mom brought the tea to make amends. You're making it sound like she poisoned you. Don't you feel ashamed? It's probably just an upset stomach. Mom would never do something like that. Stephen wouldn't believe that I was being malicious, but without evidence, I couldn't press the issue. Still, I have been wary of anything from mother-in-law since then. Just before Stephen's birthday, mother-in-law called. Karen, I'm cooking for Stephen's birthday. Say you can come or not, it's up to you. You're busy, right? Maybe you should take some time to refresh yourself. She was planning to celebrate Stephen's birthday without me. I hadn't dared to eat anything from her since that day, and homemade food was out of the question. But I was planning to spend Stephen's birthday together, so I felt upset. I thought we would spend his birthday together since we are newlyweds. I assume you have celebrated with him every year until now, so from now on it's my turn. Before I could complete my sentence, she abruptly interrupted me. Regardless, I insist on Stephen returning home. Karen, your presence is optional. We can defer the celebration of your birthday to next month, all right? I left the decision in Steph's hands. That nickname of hers, Steph responded, Did you catch that? You have the freedom to do whatever you please on that day. Without hesitation, he favored his mother-in-law over me, and my patience was wearing thin. On Stephen's birthday, his enthusiasm was contagious, but it left me feeling queasy. My affection for him began to dwindle. He relished celebrating exclusively with his mom, transforming into more of a mama's boy. Their dining outings became more frequent. I'm occupied with work and can't dwell on this all the time. A month flew by, and it was my birthday. Traditionally, we celebrated at our favorite restaurant. I assumed this year would follow suit, but Stephen surprised me. Mom wants to join in the celebration. She'd be happiest if the two of you could get along. I was taken aback, frozen in shock. Stephen, still exuberant, remained oblivious. I expressed, I wanted to celebrate with just you, Stephen. We spent your birthday together, so let's do the same for mine. Stephen, for some inexplicable reason, interpreted it as politeness. No need to hold back. Mom offered, so it's fine. He just couldn't grasp it. With no other option, I had to be resolute. No offense to mother-in-law, but I want to spend my birthday exclusively with you. I'd like to go to our special restaurant. Suddenly, Stephen erupted in anger. Don't reject Mom's kindness. You're heartless. Haven't you realized she didn't invite you to my birthday? Just comply with my wishes. It's already a hassle. I was done arguing. And then came my birthday. Instead of the anticipated restaurant outing, we were at home, with mother-in-law in tow. Neither of them seemed attuned to my subdued mood. My frustration escalated as I observed them enjoying themselves in the kitchen. Then the lights dimmed, and the cake made its entrance. Despite my anger, the cake provided a brief respite before I blew out the candles. Mother-in-law excitedly announced a special gift for my birthday celebration. I splurged on a $5,000 bottle of wine. Let's uncork it right away. The packaging appeared worn, and the cork crumbled at the touch. Is this what they call vintage? She pondered aloud, pouring a generous amount into my glass. Even in the subdued lighting, it was evident that the wine had an unsettling cloudiness. Recollections of the Chinese tea mishap flooded my mind as I cautiously took a small sip. What is this? I immediately spat it out, prompting me to turn on the lights. In the kitchen sink, I inverted the bottle of mother-in-law's supposedly extravagant $5,000 wine, watching as it flowed down the drain. Stephen swiftly seized the bottle from my hands, scolding me, "You're being awful." Apologized to Mom. "What do you think you're doing?" The anger etched on Stephen's face was unmistakable. Under Stephen's intense gaze, I poured some wine into the glass he was holding. "Can you drink this then?" Stephen appeared puzzled yet resolute as he took a sip. At that precise moment, mother-in-law urgently shouted, "Stephen, Don't drink it. Unfortunately, it was too late. He immediately spat it out, exclaiming, "What on earth is this?" Mother-in-law, shocked, took the wine away from Stephen. He questioned, "Mom, where did you get this wine? We need to file a complaint. This is fraud. It's spoiled." Mother-in-law, looking guilty, admitted, "That wine was just sitting in the back of our kitchen. It's 50 years old. I heard on TV that it gains $1,000 in value every year. Vintage wines are supposed to be stored in wine coolers." Upon closer examination, the cork was more deteriorated than initially thought, emitting a moldy odor. Even Stephen couldn't conceal his surprise. What bothered me was mother-in-law's insistence. "Don't drink it." I suspect she knew it was spoiled, but she would never admit it. I couldn't find it in me to forgive mother-in-law for her actions. "Could you please leave? I can't control my emotions. Just go," I implored. Yet even as I spoke, mother-in-law continued to offer excuses to Stephen. I felt invisible, but even she, visibly uncomfortable, hurriedly departed. Once she was gone, Stephen surprised me with his response. "Mom doesn't drink, so she wouldn't have known." Thankfully, we didn't offer it to anyone else. Despite everything, Stephen defended mother-in-law as if it were an innocent mistake. In that moment, my feelings for him cooled. My determination against Stephen solidified as he defended mother-in-law despite her actions against me. I had ignored his excessive attachment to his mother for too long. "I want a divorce," I declared, presenting Stephen with divorce papers I had kept just in case. He was rendered speechless, questioning my decision. "Ask yourself, do you comprehend how much I've endured? I've reached my breaking point." Then, to compound matters, he offered a profound apology without prompting, stating, "I won't repeat it. You've won." He proceeded to confess to multiple affairs, revealing 4 different women. Though I had harbored suspicions of infidelity, learning the truth left me shocked. There was no longer any doubt. I was determined to divorce him. Engaging a private investigator seemed unnecessary. Evidence of his affairs was abundant. During our conversation, he foolishly remarked, "You'll regret divorcing someone as great as me." Stephen's words only fueled my disgust at myself for ever loving him. Multiple affairs and his attachment to his mother provided ample grounds for divorce. To streamline the process, I resolved to hire a lawyer, regardless of the cost. Initially resistant to the divorce, Stephen eventually relented, likely recognizing the gravity of his mistakes. He returned to his doting mother, and later it surfaced that his affair was with a co-worker, leading to his demotion. Unable to distance himself from his mother, Stephen ultimately resigned from his job. Despite his ongoing job hunt, word of his workplace indiscretions had spread rapidly, hindering his prospects in the same field. Persistently tethered to his mother, he settled for part-time work. Given his arrogant and unreliable demeanor, it seems unlikely that he will maintain the job for an extended period. While I rely on his steady employment to receive alimony, the payments are currently consistent, so I'll count that as a win. I discovered that mother-in-law, who had presented herself as superior, was in fact a hoarder. Stephen's family home turned out to be a literal dump, explaining their reluctance to have me over. As the stench became a bother to neighbors, police intervention became necessary. The mere thought of consuming wine from that house still turns my stomach. Let Stephen live in his squalid environment and work his sporadic part-time jobs with his beloved mother-in-law for all I care. Though I've returned to my previous life, I find happiness in the absence of torment. No longer will Stephen disrupt my workplace, providing a welcome relief. In hindsight, Stephen possessed good looks but little else. The fact that he complies with alimony payments is a silver lining, I suppose. The breakup taught me a valuable lesson. Love is, indeed, blind. This time, I'm putting romance on hold to focus on my career. I've learned my lesson and am determined to prioritize my professional pursuits.
My mother-in-law told me something surprising. She said, "We're going to live together now. We turned the house into 2 separate homes to make it easier. Is the house in your name, Emma? Sorry to ask, but can you pay the $80,000 bill for the changes?" My mother-in-law and husband thought it was funny, but I felt determined. I was going to tell them something important, even though my husband didn't know yet. I had proof too. My name is Emma Davis, and I'm 26 years old. I live a little away from the city in a place surrounded by nature. I work in an office and draw pictures for fun. Recently, I've been sharing my drawings online and reading the comments people leave. My husband, who is 3 years older than me, and I have been happily married and living in our beloved old farmhouse since we got married. But there's been a visitor who comes by once a month since then, and they always give me a headache. "Emma, I'm here. Please open up quickly." I hurried to the front door when I heard the insistent banging. "Ah, it's my mother-in-law." "I'll open it right away," I said, even though there's a doorbell right next to the door. I tried to smile as I opened the sliding door. There are so many bugs around here. It's so annoying. Is George still at work? Poor thing, even on Saturday. Oh, I brought some of his favorite food. I saw a tired-looking woman holding a big bag waiting at the door. As she chattered on, I tried to keep up my fake smile. This visitor, who comes once a month, is none other than my husband's mother, my mother-in-law. Since my husband is an only child, she feels it's her duty to look after him even after we got married. She even gives me tips on how to manage the house. Last time she visited, she rearranged the whole fridge, making it a hassle for me to prepare breakfast the next day. I remember my husband telling me before we got married, if my parents ever need care, we'll live together. I hope you understand. I'm disappointed at the thought of leaving our lovely old house when the time comes, but I've accepted it. What bothers me more is the idea of living with my mother-in-law all the time. I feel sorry for my husband, as it's not something I'm looking forward to. Fast forward 2 years into our married life in the farmhouse. My husband told me that his father slipped on the stairs at home and broke his leg. They'll need our help from now on. Let's live together, just like we talked about before we got married. Yes, I'm worried too. So I think it's a good idea. Can I still do my drawings? I was concerned about my father-in-law's health, so I agreed to move in with them without hesitation. But I was worried that taking care of my in-laws and doing housework might leave me with no time for my drawing hobby. Whether he knew about my worries or not, my husband just said, "I want you to focus on the house," and left for his office. Left alone in my room, I felt like I was giving up on my husband. As I looked through my drawings, I started sorting out my feelings. Just when I had decided to live with them, something unexpected happened. While I was at work, I suddenly felt numbness in my hands and feet and got really dizzy. I collapsed. Thankfully, a colleague called an ambulance, and although I wasn't in danger, it turned out I had had a stroke at a young age after a medical checkup. Even though I had been warned about high blood pressure during health checkups before, I regretted not taking it seriously and going to the hospital. From the time I found out about the illness to being hospitalized, including tests, surgery, and recovery, it took about 2 months. It all happened so quickly, and I realized my husband showed very little concern for me. After being diagnosed with a stroke at a young age, I called my husband with trembling hands. But all I heard was disappointment in his voice, saying, "So living together will have to wait, huh?" I couldn't believe he was more worried about living arrangements than my health. Luckily, my father-in-law was still in the hospital with a fracture, so I didn't have to worry about taking care of him. This allowed me to focus on my treatment, which was a silver lining. Plus, since we didn't have kids, that wasn't an added concern. Suddenly, I thought of my mother-in-law, always talking about wanting to see her grandchild soon. But I pushed that thought away and grabbed my sketchbook. Lately, I had been too busy with preparations to live with my in-laws and undergoing tests since my stroke to indulge in my favorite pastime of drawing. I knew once I moved in with them, I'd have even less time for it. I decided to view my time in the hospital as a gift of freedom from God and resolved to enjoy my hobby to the fullest. Once this period was over, I promised myself to give my best to my husband and in-laws, whether it was doing chores or anything else. The 2-month hospital stay flew by, and finally it was time to leave. My husband casually asked if he should pick me up, but I wanted some time alone, so I declined, feeling a bit guilty. As I rode the bus, I looked out the window and saw the familiar scenery. I realized I was already near home. The sunlight shining on the lush green leaves was breathtaking, and I felt a mix of emotions, thinking goodbye to this beautiful natural setting. Since my in-laws' house is closer to the city, my life is going to change a lot from now on. Feeling a bit sad, I stepped off the bus at the familiar stop. As I walked towards what was supposed to be my beloved old home, I suddenly froze in astonishment. Instead of the familiar private house I knew so well, there stood a completely unfamiliar house that I had never seen before. After being in the hospital for about 2 months, I double-checked the surrounding buildings and the path I took, wondering if I had somehow gotten a location wrong. But it was no mistake. There was no point in wandering around, so I timidly pressed the intercom of the unfamiliar house. A voice I knew well, undoubtedly my husband's, responded with a simple yes. Still feeling confused, I quietly said, "It's Michelle," into the intercom. The front door creaked open and my husband, dressed casually, appeared. "Ah, welcome home. You're back earlier than I expected. I had the day off today. I could have picked you up," George said. "George, what happened to our house? Why has it changed so much?" I interrupted him, feeling disbelief, noticing his relaxed demeanor, perhaps indicating he had just woken up with his messy hair. Ignoring my anxiousness, George only responded vaguely, "Huh. What's going on? What happened?" without addressing my question. Just then, laughter echoed from inside the house. Unable to believe it, I pushed past my husband and made my way to the living room. Opening the unfamiliar door leading to the living room, I saw my mother-in-law lying on a couch, watching TV. She was laughing heartily, holding her stomach. "Why is my mother-in-law in this house?" I asked, bewildered. "Michelle, welcome back. Hospital stays can be long, but don't worry. I took care of the house while you were gone," my mother-in-law said casually. I was puzzled by what my mother-in-law meant by taking care of the house. Did she mean chores? With a sinking feeling, I pressed her on why our old house had changed so much. Without any hint of remorse, she replied, "Well, since we're all going to live together, I thought it would be more comfortable to remodel it into a duplex." The words "remodeled it into a duplex" kept echoing in my head. My mother-in-law had always been one to meddle in our lives, but I never imagined she would renovate our house without asking. And weren't we supposed to move into my in-laws' house, closer to the city center? Every time she visited our old house, she complained about the bugs and the walk from the station. So why all the changes now? "Oh, and if something else important I have to tell you," my mother-in-law said, switching off the TV with a grin. "The remodeling cost a bit. I believe the title to this house is under your name, Michelle. I'm sorry, but could you handle the payment?" My mother-in-law chuckled, devoid of any hint of apology. "Ah, it's $80,000, she said, her smile growing wider. "That's the cost of remodeling, and the title to this house comes with it, Michelle. $80,000. Her unexpected words hit me like a punch to the head, and my legs started shaking. I couldn't even find the words to respond. As I stared at my mother-in-law, stunned and laughing without a care, my husband appeared at the entrance and slipped into the living room. Seeing him, I instinctively moved towards him, holding on to a faint hope that he would support me. I repeated to my husband exactly what my mother-in-law had said, desperately awaiting his reaction, but all I got from him was a cold reply. "Well, that sounds about right. You'll handle it, won't you?" That's just who he is. When I had a stroke, he cared more about our living arrangements than my health. He's the kind of man who listens to his mother's every word, no matter how absurd. A man who always believes his mother is right. My discomfort and dissatisfaction towards my husband reached a boiling point. Once it overflowed, I was done. With all my heart, I decided I would leave this family behind. "I understand now, George. I'm going to divorce you and your mother, Cecilia. And no, Cecilia, you can handle the renovation costs on your own." I declared this all at once and turned my back on them, intending to leave the room quickly, but they weren't going to let me go so easily. "I've been losing interest in you anyway, so it's no big deal. But remember, this house is in your name, Emma, so you have a responsibility to pay," George remarked. "That's right, feel free to leave, but please settle your dues first," added Cecilia. I was astonished by their selfishness. I couldn't help but sigh. I was sure if I turned around, I'd see their smug faces grinning in victory, but I refused to look back. I stood tall and replied, "You keep saying the house is in my name, George, but did you forget that ownership has been transferred to you?" I revealed the truth, but they only laughed. thinking I was lying to avoid paying. That's when I brought up how George had asked me to change the property's ownership when we got married, as he didn't want the house to be in his wife's name for appearance's sake. Since I didn't particularly care about the property title, I had immediately transferred it to his name. Upon hearing this, their laughter abruptly stopped, and I could feel their panic gradually setting in. I don't recall saying such a thing. There's no proof anyway, George retorted. Anticipating this response, I turned back to face them, walked past them, and opened a drawer in a shelf from our old house. Let's see, it should be somewhere around. Ah, here it is. This is the proof, I said, taking out a document that listed the property and house ownership and showed it to them. When I pointed to the part that showed the ownership was in George's name, his face went pale. That's fraud. I never thought you'd actually do it, and I definitely can't pay such a huge sum of $80,000. George exclaimed. I was disgusted by my husband's reaction. He started yelling as soon as he realized the payment obligation was on him. Since a decent conversation seems impossible, let's communicate through lawyers from now on. Cecilia, your son seems to be in quite a pickle, so please take good care of him from now on, I stated calmly beside my loud husband. I smiled at my mother-in-law, who stood dazed, and finally turned my back on them, leaving their home for good. After that, my husband called several times, but I chose to ignore him entirely, opting instead to communicate formally through a lawyer, given our strained relationship and the issues with my mother-in-law. The divorce was settled without any problems. Regarding my husband's accusation that changing the property's ownership was fraud, it was determined that it was a mutual decision made when we got married 2 years ago. My lawyer reassured me with a smile that this was neither fraud nor anything illegal. With that, all the uncertainty inside me disappeared completely. It turned out that I was supposed to foot the bill for renovating the house as soon as I got discharged from a hospital. I couldn't help but appreciate the well-executed, spiteful move of pushing me into a difficult situation just after I had undergone surgery and rehabilitation and finally got discharged due to illness. In the end, since the house was in my husband's name, it was his responsibility to pay the hefty renovation costs, and he ended up cornering himself. Moreover, I was able to secure alimony after the divorce was finalized. My husband, faced with a claim for an amount he couldn't possibly pay off, either borrowed money from risky sources or didn't pay at all. While I was in the midst of the legal battle with my husband and mother-in-law, I received an apology from my father-in-law, Bob, who had been hospitalized with a broken leg, saying, "I'm sorry for my wife and son's behavior." Of course, it didn't seem that Bob was directly involved in this matter, but it couldn't be denied that for 2 years after our marriage, he had turned a blind eye to his wife and my indifferent husband. After briefly replying to Bob's message, I made the decision to cut all ties with my old family and start afresh. Since then, my health has been gradually improving and I was able to return to work. When I was married, I used to draw illustrations, but I always felt restricted by my husband's presence. Now, I can immerse myself in drawing whenever and however I want. Initially, drawing was just a hobby, but now I receive job offers through the social networking site where I post my illustrations. I spend more time drawing for work than for pleasure these days. My current dream is to buy an old farmhouse in a somewhat rural town using the alimony from my husband and my savings, and to open an art studio there. Today, I'm taking the first step towards realizing that dream by heading to see an old farmhouse. As I gaze out at the scenery from the bus, I can't help but think back to the day I left the hospital, the day that changed my life forever. The natural scenery outside remains the same as it was that day, but my feelings are clearer now, and I'm filled with excitement for the new life that awaits me. The leaves on the trees, illuminated by the sunlight, look so bright and dazzling. My son and I are about to start living a luxurious life abroad with his $3 million. Once you get divorced, you won't be able to support yourself. If you want to know where we're going, you need to get on your knees and lick my shoes. What? What are you saying? I don't understand. I had no idea what my mother-in-law was talking about. I never knew they were planning to go abroad or that they had saved up so much money. It's because my son has $3 million. We're going to live a fancy life overseas, just the two of us. Why would my husband go abroad? And what's this about $3 million? Why do you want to know so badly? If you really want to know, kneel down, beg, and lick my shoes. Then maybe I'll tell you. Why are you acting like this? Where is my husband? Oh, we're very comfortable here. We're enjoying the high life with my son's $3 million, so you're no longer needed. I was shocked by my mother-in-law's words. What does she mean that my husband suddenly got $3 million and is living a luxurious life abroad? And why is she talking as if I'm an outsider? I was filled with anger and anxiety, but I needed to stay calm and figure out what was going on. How did my husband get such a huge amount of money? And could that $3 million be connected to something else? I work as a manager at a big IT company, and that's where I met my husband. His positive and cheerful personality drew me to him, and we eventually got married. In the early years of our marriage, his parents welcomed me warmly. Later on, we had a daughter who is now 14 years old. I grew up in poverty and had a difficult relationship with my parents. Because of my own challenging upbringing, I was determined to give my daughter all the love and care she deserved, while also balancing my career and household responsibilities. However, one day, my husband was assigned to a project in Texas and had to move there alone. It's going to be tough managing everything on my own with our daughter, I told him. Yeah, handling work, chores, and our daughter by yourself will be a lot. Maybe we should ask my mom to come and help out, he suggested. Reluctantly, I agreed, seeing it as a practical solution to our situation. So, we decided to have my mother-in-law move in with us to lend a hand. Mommy, when is Daddy coming back? My daughter asked one day. He's going to be in Texas for a while. But don't worry, Grandma's coming over, I reassured my daughter. And so, my mother-in-law moved in with us. Little did I know that this decision would become the biggest regret of my life. You're working late again today, huh? Women who neglect their families. I would often come home to her biting remarks. I have a job too, and I take care of our daughter. I would argue back, but she was never satisfied. When I was young, family meant everything. I never even thought about working outside the home, she would reminisce. Then, on the day my daughter received good grades at school, she remarked, "It's all thanks to me. What's the point of you? Maybe we don't need you around." Despite my mother-in-law only helping with simple homework tasks, I was the one teaching my daughter most subjects. Whenever I made a small mistake while cooking, she'd criticize, "How did you and my son survive before with such poor cooking skills?" "I'm doing my best and everyone has their own way," I'd retort, feeling my patience wearing thin. "She's not doing her chores," she'd complain to my husband. "Mom, she's working too. Please understand," my husband would defend me. Living together, tensions between my mother-in-law and me grew. With my husband far away, I felt increasingly isolated. One day, I decided to call my husband to talk about it. "How? Are you okay right now?" "Yeah, I'm good. What's up? It's kind of late." "Well, your mom really laid into me about the house chores, and it's starting to get to me." "I'm sorry. Mom's always been sharp-tongued, but maybe there's something to what she's saying. Still, don't let it bother you too much. Just keep doing things at your own pace." Feeling somewhat reassured by my husband's words, I tried to refocus on our daily routine. But with my husband away, the pressure from my mother-in-law kept mounting, and I was becoming increasingly exhausted. Each day, I eagerly awaited my husband's return. Living with my mother-in-law in my husband's absence was tough. At first, I clung to his memory to get through, but as weeks passed, her behavior became unbearable. She criticized every little thing I did from morning till night. When I made my husband's favorite rice dish, she coldly remarked, "This tastes terrible. Who would eat this?" If I took a short break, she'd scold me, saying, "How can a woman who can't handle household chores take a break?" I never had much confidence in housework. With my husband, he would just laugh off my small mistakes. But in front of my mother-in-law, I felt like I couldn't afford to make any errors. I think her treatment of me comes from her intense love for her son. She seems unwilling to accept that he married me and moved away from her. This experience made me resolve never to become an overbearing parent like her. One day, after treating myself to a small shopping spree at a local mall, my mother-in-law found out. When I got home, she was waiting for me at the entrance, furious. "How could you go out for fun when your husband isn't home? What about the household chores?" I thought I needed a little break. A break? In this situation? All this trouble is because of your incompetence." After that encounter, I waited for a call from my husband. I hoped hearing his voice would lift my spirits, but what he said was far from comforting. "I've got some bad news. My work in Texas isn't going well. I got into gambling, and now I'm in a tight spot financially. I've also accumulated quite a debt," my husband confessed over the phone. "What? Are you serious? Gambling in debt? This is completely unexpected. What about our future and our daughters?" I replied, shocked and worried. "I'm sorry, really sorry. I feel stuck right now, but trust me, I'll figure something out," he pleaded. "How? How do you plan to handle this? How much do you owe?" "I'm working on a solution," was all he could say. I always believed my husband was sincere and wouldn't gamble. He was always dependable, never missing our dates. Even after we moved in together, he always came straight home from work and appreciated everything I did around the house. It was his honesty and sincerity that made me fall in love with him. But now, with him far away and my mother-in-law's constant criticism, my life felt unbearable. "I can't believe someone as useless as you married my son," my mother-in-law's harsh words echoed in my mind. My heart sank deeper into despair as my husband continued working away from home. Constantly criticized and blamed by my mother-in-law, the weight of my husband's recent confession about his debts and gambling only added to my despair. With the barrage of criticism from her, I reached a breaking point. One night, overwhelmed, I left the house and found myself crying on a park bench. Then one day, my mother-in-law unearthed a secret from my past. During dinner, she used it against me. "So, I heard you used to work in a nightclub, huh? Shame on you for raising my grandchild after working in such a place. How did you find out about that?" I was telling someone about how useless my son's wife is and showed them a picture of you. They recognized you. Apparently, you weren't even good at that nightclub job. In my past, frustrated with a mother who never worked and always partied, I left my family home. Struggling for money, I found work at a nightclub. This was before I married my husband, a secret I thought he didn't know. I was speechless. I never imagined my mother-in-law would discover this about my past, and now she was using it against me. "I can't believe someone like you is the mother of my grandchild. I'll tell my son and have you kicked out." My despair deepened. Everything I had built with my husband, all my efforts, and the future I had hoped for seemed to crumble under her words. My husband's communication became scarce, and I feared he was beginning to doubt and suspect me. One night, alone in my room, I reflected on my life, meeting my husband, our marriage, our current situation, and the constant blame and accusations from my mother-in-law. I felt like I couldn't go on. "I can't take it anymore." Whispering those words, I stepped out into the quiet nighttime streets, feeling the weight of despair inside me. My mother-in-law's harsh words echoed in my mind, criticizing my past, my secrets, and my present. Sitting alone on a park bench, I looked up at the sky, devoid of stars, feeling as dark inside as it was outside. Suddenly, someone approached. "Mom, why are you here?" It was my daughter, sitting down beside me and holding my hand. "Mom, don't let Grandma get to you. You work hard at your IT job, and you've overcome so much. You're strong." "Thank you, but maybe Grandma is right." "Mom, Grandma is stuck in the past. In today's world, any job you've done should make you proud." "I'm proud that you worked at a nightclub." "Really?" "Yes, because it shows you've always tried your best for us, no matter the circumstances. Don't let Grandma's words control you." My daughter's words touched me deeply, and tears welled up in my eyes. "Mom, you're doing such a great job in IT now, right? That's amazing. I'll always support you, no matter what Grandma says." Gratitude flooded my heart. Her unwavering support gave me renewed strength and hope that we could face anything together. Later, in my husband's study, I took a deep breath before diving into a pile of paperwork. I meticulously went through each document, trying to unravel his secrets. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements. Gradually, my husband's financial situation began to reveal itself. Why did this happen? I discovered several receipts detailing gambling activities, horse racing, slot machines, and casino visits. The realization of how much money my husband had squandered was heartbreaking. Turning on his PC, I guessed the reverse version of his birthday as the password to access his email. Inside, I found numerous collection emails from financial institutions and messages from friends demanding repayment of loans. Additionally, his inbox was flooded with promotional emails from gambling websites. I decided to tally up the total amount my husband had spent on gambling. The staggering result was $3 million, far exceeding what I had anticipated. Seeing that figure, I felt a moment of panic, but I knew I had to act swiftly. I started planning how to secure funds to sustain our livelihood. This included tapping into my savings, estimating proceeds from selling our high-end electronics and luxury items at home, and budgeting with my salary savings. Every detail mattered in this critical moment. Afterward, I continued my personal investigation. Every day, I diligently contacted financial institutions to understand the extent of my husband's debts, obtaining credit reports in his name. A few days later, I formulated a plan. I started laying the groundwork to establish a life independent of my husband and mother-in-law, while also devising a strategy to repay his debts. Leveraging my expertise in the IT industry, I decided to pursue freelance projects. Over the next few days, I built a portfolio and signed up on a freelance job platform. Shortly after, I received my first request from a client. This will help cover some of our living expenses, I thought gratefully. In between my daily work, I meticulously reviewed our household finances. I canceled unnecessary subscriptions, reduced wasteful spending, and researched budget-friendly recipes to cut down on food expenses. With insights from local moms, I organized a community yard sale, successfully selling branded items and extra electronics for a decent sum. As my freelance work gained momentum over the following weeks, I began to feel more secure about my income. By then, my bank account held enough to cover our essential living expenses. When I returned home one day, I noticed all of my mother-in-law's belongings were gone. At the same time, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law calling. "Oh, are you already home? Did you notice our stuff is gone?" My mother-in-law's voice came through the phone. "What are you trying to say?" I asked cautiously. "My son and I are starting a luxurious life abroad with his $3 million. Once you divorce, you won't be able to make ends meet. If you want our address, get on your knees and lick my shoes," she declared arrogantly. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Actually, that $3 million is a debt." "Stop joking. There's no way my son has that kind of debt," she retorted confidently. "You might not believe it, but it's true. In his study, there are transaction records from banks and financial institutions, credit card bills, contracts, and more. Plus, on his PC, there are collection emails from financial institutions, messages from friends demanding repayment, and promotional emails from gambling sites. If you don't believe me, why don't you check?" "You're lying," she insisted. "It's the result of his deep involvement in gambling, horse racing, slot machines, casinos. In total, it amounts to a staggering $3 million. I've just sent you photos of the evidence. Maybe you should take a look." I had no idea, my mother-in-law admitted, her voice softening. "He probably didn't want you to know, but these are the facts. I've been figuring out how to handle this enormous debt, but I suppose I don't need to anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I truly didn't know. I don't know what to say," she finally responded. Without another word, I ended the call. I knew I had to start afresh from this point onward. Despite the shock caused by my husband and mother-in-law's actions, I resolved to move forward for the sake of my daughter and myself. Later on, my husband called. "I'm so sorry. Truly, I am." My husband's voice came through, subdued in a way I had never heard before. But despite his apology, my anger burned unabated. "Why did it come to this? Our family is falling apart because of you," I retorted sharply. "I never thought it would come to this. But when I decided to go overseas with Mom, I couldn't see a future with you and our daughter," he explained, his words leaving me stunned. "You couldn't see? It's because of your recklessness and lack of planning that our family is in this mess," I accused bitterly. "I know that, but it's too late now. I made a promise to Mom," he replied. "A promise? What kind of promise sacrifices our daughter's future for your own paradise?" I challenged, feeling the weight of betrayal. There was a prolonged silence from my husband. "Did you ever truly love our family?" "I did, but now it's different." His voice broke, and I could hear him crying. "Please don't hurt us anymore. My daughter and I will live on our own from now on. We'll move on without you." He didn't respond. All I could hear was his sobbing from the other end. Calmly, I hung up the phone. The confusion started when my mother-in-law mistook a bill for $3 million as a winning lottery notice. Believing they had come into a windfall, she began planning their dream move overseas and convinced my husband to go along. Unaware of her misunderstanding and thinking a fresh start abroad would solve their financial woes, he agreed. Realizing it was a bill and not a lottery win, my anger towards my husband grew. I began searching for a lawyer, preparing for divorce, and seeking compensation for emotional distress and child support. A new chapter was about to begin for me and my daughter, free from my husband and mother-in-law. I consulted with a lawyer about the divorce process, emotional distress claims, and securing child support. During this time, my daughter and I bonded deeply, and she became my strongest supporter. She fully understood my decision and chose to stand by me. Hearing her unwavering support made all the hardships with my husband and mother-in-law worthwhile, and tears of relief and gratitude flowed freely. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and husband struggled in their new life overseas. Despite their hopes for a fresh start, they encountered ongoing challenges due to inadequate preparation and financial troubles. Their situation worsened when they were pickpocketed and lost their remaining funds, compounded by language barriers. Eventually, they were deported for overstaying their visas. Later on, I negotiated the terms of the divorce through my lawyer. The divorce was finalized, and we agreed that my husband would pay emotional distress compensation and child support in a single lump sum. As my daughter and I embraced our new life free from the turmoil of the past, I felt a sense of peace knowing we were moving forward together, stronger and more resilient than before. Thank you. Now I can finally start a new life, I expressed with relief. But all at once, wouldn't it be better in installments? The lawyer suggested. He's taken on even more debt, apparently borrowing money from some shady loan shark. I don't know what happened to him after that, and honestly, I don't care. After being evicted from her rental property and losing all her savings due to being pickpocketed, my mother-in-law found herself homeless upon her return to the U.S. Meanwhile, my daughter and I embarked on our new life. It wasn't without its challenges, but being free from the burden of my husband and mother-in-law allowed us to face the future with optimism. I am determined to live happily, working together with my daughter, who has been my beacon of hope through the darkest times.
I am Chelsea. A few weeks ago, my father, who had been battling illness, passed away. Regret filled me as I wished I could have shown him his grandchildren. The words escaped my lips along with a sigh. I got married 5 years ago at the age of 25. At my wedding, my father and I made a promise. I'll let you know first when I get pregnant. However, that promise remained unfulfilled, and it became my only regret about my father. His illness was discovered a year ago, and since then, I did everything I could for him. I regularly returned to my parents' home, visited the hospital with my mother, and increased the frequency of phone calls and video chats. Despite my efforts, I couldn't help but wonder if I could have done more. As I muttered these thoughts, my mother, sitting next to me, reassured me, saying, "You did well, Chelsea. Your father would be satisfied." Just then, my sister Portia returned, bringing the lawyer with her. My sister entered the living room, accompanied by a man in his mid-40s, whom I assumed was the lawyer. He handed me his business card, introducing himself as Samuel, the attorney. Gratefully, I acknowledged his presence, and my mother guided him to his seat. As soon as the lawyer sat down, my sister blurted out, "I heard from this lawyer that Dad left quite an inheritance." I quickly clarified, "It's not all for you, Portia." An uneasy tension filled the room as my sister glared at me, revealing our strained relationship. We used to be okay, but things soured when we found out about Dad's illness. Despite my attempts to bridge the gap, my sister's arrogant attitude and reluctance to visit our father only worsened our relationship. I expressed my frustration, but she insisted, "I'm not being stubborn. I live in the city, and it's not easy to come to the countryside." Our argument continued, and I realized that our relationship had deteriorated quickly. Even though she lived far away, I believed she could have visited once in a while. In the end, she stopped talking, and the tension hung in the air. Attempting to defuse the situation, the lawyer intervened, saying, "Let's calm down, please." I apologized and the lawyer nodded before continuing. As I mentioned on the phone, I have your father's will. My mother inquired. When did this happen? The lawyer replied. A few weeks before he passed away. He contacted me, so I went to the hospital to have him sign the will in front of me, with his primary physician present. It turned out they had arranged for the primary physician to contact the lawyer. After my father passed away, the lawyer was contacted. He, in turn, reached out to us, explaining the circumstances. That's how we find ourselves here today, the lawyer said, producing a white envelope and placing it in front of us. Inspecting the envelope, I mumbled, "This is definitely Dad's handwriting." My sister Portia seemed impatient, saying, "Never mind, just tell us what's in it. I'm busy, you know." The lawyer, with a wry smile, opened the envelope to reveal a single piece of paper. "This is what was written there," he began, explaining that besides the house and land, our father's inheritance included some savings and a storage shed. The mention of the storage shed puzzled me. My sister, however, interrupted angrily. "Wait a minute. You didn't mention the farm." "The farm, yes," I added, recalling that it was a hobby my father took up after closing his company. He had started farming near our home until he fell ill. My sister insisted that the farm should be part of the inheritance. Reviewing the documents, the lawyer found a note and revealed, "The farm is rented land." Disappointed, my sister thought we owned it, but I silently considered it might be for the best since we knew little about farming. The conversation shifted to dividing the inheritance. "The house and land go to the wife," the lawyer declared. My sister was content, but the lawyer suggested dividing the rest as we pleased. My sister promptly claimed the cash from the savings, approximately $100,000. Protesting against this selfish arrangement, I objected. "Wait a minute. I'm the oldest daughter. That's irrelevant. I'll take the storage shed." My sister turned to the lawyer, asking, "What even is that?" The lawyer explained, "It's the storage shed next to the house. You'll inherit the building, the land, and its contents." My sister's eyes lit up, and she eagerly accepted. As I questioned her motives, the lawyer continued, "It's about 65 square feet, roughly the size of a small bedroom." Reacting with distaste, my sister grimaced as the lawyer placed photos of the shed on the table. The exterior looked run down, and the interior contained only basic tools, nothing valuable. My sister declared, "I don't want it." I took the photos and painted them myself. It was all quite ordinary. Though these are sentimental items, they won't fetch much money, I thought. As I pondered, my sister spoke up, saying, "Fine, I'll take the cash. You can have that dirty shed." "Hold on, that's not fair. You agreed to the vegetable farming. What are you complaining about now?" My sister retorted. It was difficult to argue against her point, but if I didn't speak up, she'd take all of Dad's inheritance. My sister pressed me, asking, "So we're good then?" Struggling to answer, my mother chimed in, "As long as Portia won't complain later, I have no objections." My sister grinned, and it seemed settled. However, feeling uneasy, I immediately objected, saying, "Well, I'm not satisfied." "Give it up. You're so greedy, aren't you?" My sister remarked, calling me a hassle. Frustrated, I insisted, "That's not it. You care more about Dad than money, right?" Her words left me speechless, realizing that family is more important than money. Before I could say more, my sister ended the conversation. In the end, my mother got the house and land. My sister received Dad's savings, and all that was left for me was the dirty shed. My sister signed a document promising not to complain about the inheritance division, laughing loudly. Full of complaints, I couldn't help but vent to my mother, asking, "Mom, why didn't you help me?" She replied, "I did help you. You decided with Portia." I argued, "That's not true. I made sure you got the shed." My mother assured me, "You might find something surprisingly good if you look closely." The next day, armed with the key from the lawyer, I headed to the shed near the field, a 10-minute walk from home. It was a rural road where no one else passed by. Upon reaching the field, which my father had rented for the past year, I opened the dusty shed with the key. As I looked around, there was nothing special inside, just tools for farming. Disappointed, I mumbled, maybe I should just take what's inside for now. However, upon closer inspection, I noticed that the shed felt smaller from the inside than it appeared from the outside. Puzzled, I walked around to the back and discovered another door. Gasping, I realized there was a space accessible only from the back. Excited, I thought this must be Dad's surprise. Remembering his love for surprises, I began tearing up. Rummaging through the shed, I found 2 keys hidden in the handle of a shovel. Trying one in the back door, it clicked open. Inside the cramped space, a large safe stood alone. Recognizing it from Dad's company, I hugged the safe, feeling fulfilled. Thinking that there had to be more surprises, I inserted the second key into the safe. With a slightly rusty sound, the safe opened, revealing contents that left me in disbelief. I was stunned. Inside was an unexpected inheritance. Overwhelmed with thoughts, I realized I had to tell Mom. Locking the safe, I rushed to her and, after explaining the situation, called my husband. Together, we moved the safe from my parents' house. However, a realization hit me. The contents were undoubtedly Dad's. If it's part of my inheritance, including the shed, I might have to pay inheritance tax. Better get this thoroughly checked out. The valuable contents warranted consultation with the lawyer about inheritance tax. According to the lawyer, consulting a certified public accountant was advised. A friend referred me to an accountant, and I left the complicated matters in their capable hands. A year passed in this way, and just when I thought things had settled down, my sister showed up near my home. "What brings you here all of a sudden?" I asked. "Well, I had some business at our parents' house, so I stopped by." "Something like that?" my sister replied. Her behavior struck me as odd. Despite the proximity of our homes, we weren't the kind of sisters who would casually visit, especially after the tension over Dad's inheritance. Suspicion lingered as I looked at her. Acting a bit nervous, my sister asked, "Can I come in?" I agreed, but her visit was unusual. After serving coffee, she started fidgeting and finally spoke. "So, did you win the lottery or something?" I shook my head in confusion. "No, I didn't." "Did your husband get a bonus?" I replied, "I never buy lottery tickets, and my husband's bonus isn't due now." "What are you talking about?" Angrily, she exclaimed. "What are you making fun of me for?" "Money, you had it, don't you?" She excitedly shared a story from a few days ago when she ran into our aunt in the city. The aunt mentioned receiving a $500 gift card as a thank you for visiting Dad. My sister assumed I sent it and believed I had come into extra money. She interrogated me, insisting that I admit to a windfall. Sighing, I clarified. It was a thank you gift from the inheritance. My sister didn't like my attitude and accused me of mocking her. I explained, no, it was a genuine thank you gift, but she pressed, demanding to know where I got the money. I replied, from the inheritance, remember? So, I sent thank you gifts to relatives who had helped us. Upon hearing this, my sister frowned and remarked, all you got was that dirty shed. I nodded, confirming her statement, but then added, there was a safe inside it. That's where the real inheritance was. Perplexed, my sister questioned, a safe? Real inheritance? I carefully explained to her about the watches in the safe, all of them valuable and collected by our father as a hobby during his lifetime. However, I admitted not knowing their exact value. On the other hand, the remaining savings were about $100,000, which seemed small considering our father's background as a business owner who could retire early. This led me to believe he might have invested a significant amount in those watches. My mother, upon seeing the contents of the safe, had expressed concern about potential inheritance tax. Seeking guidance, I asked her, what should I do, Mom? After some thought, she advised, things like this always come out. You should declare it properly. Let's ask that lawyer we spoke to recently. I consulted the lawyer again, who explained that if you inherit valuables, the inheritance tax is determined by their value at that time. He also suggested that a certified public accountant could handle it for me. Following this advice, I left it to the accountant. The results revealed that the watches alone were worth at least $500,000. Faced with this valuation, I questioned, how should I pay the inheritance tax? The accountant suggested, how about keeping the ones you're emotionally attached to and selling the rest? Agreeing with the practicality of this approach, I sold some watches, used the money to pay the inheritance tax, and sent thank you gifts to the helpful relatives, the gift cards my sister had mentioned. By the way, I kept items like the pocket watch my father often wore, which held the most memories for me. I showed it to my sister while explaining the story, saying, "This one isn't expensive, but it holds the most memories for me." However, my sister frowned upon hearing my story. "What? You don't have any left?" she asked. I replied, "No, there are still some in the safe, which is at Mom's. It's too big for this house. It's the one Dad used at his company." My sister looked away, seeming deep in thought. Feeling uneasy, I anticipated her reaction, but she surprised me by standing up and saying, "I'm leaving now that I know where the money came from," and left. Considering my sister's money-minded nature, I expected her to demand a share of the money from the watch sales. I was relieved she left without making a fuss. However, in my relief, I forgot the unease I had felt earlier, only to be reminded of it late that night when I received a call from my mother. "Chelsea, it's urgent. Come over right away," my mother exclaimed. Alarmed, my husband and I rushed to her house, noticing something strange as we approached. The area around my parents' house was lit up in red, and as we got closer, several police cars were parked outside. "What's going on?" I wondered, and the reason became clear: a distressing situation unfolding at my parents' house. I navigated through the crowd, calling out to my mother, "What happened, Mom?" According to her, it was after 9 p.m., and feeling tired, she had already gone to bed. Shortly afterward, she heard strange noises, sounds like someone searching for something coming from beyond the door. "Oh, it's a burglar," my mother instantly thought. Feeling helpless as she was alone in the house, she decided to escape through the window. Glancing back, she saw the light of a flashlight moving inside the house, confirming her suspicion of a burglar. Convinced, she ran to the neighbor's house and urgently sought help, saying, "There's a burglar." Upon hearing this, the neighbor promptly came out, and they both observed the swinging light my mother pointed at, thinking it was a burglar. They called the police, who arrived soon after. However, it turned out not to be a burglar at all. It was my sister who had sneaked into the house to rummage through the safe. Influenced by my story, neither my mother nor the neighbor knew this. When the police arrived, my sister, realizing she was in trouble, attempted to make a quick escape. In her rush, she accidentally bumped into the open door of the safe, causing it to topple over and fall onto her as she tried to flee. That's how Portia got trapped under the safe, and she was taken to the hospital by ambulance, complaining of leg pain. Stunned, I was truly dumbfounded by the turn of events. Afterward, my mother and I apologized to the police officers for the late-night disturbance. I also called my sister's husband, who expressed disbelief, exclaiming, "Wait, you're saying Portia broke into her own family home and got injured?" "Yes, that's correct," I replied, shocked and disappointed. Her husband revealed that Portia had accumulated a significant amount of debt, spending extravagantly on brand name items. The couple had a massive fight, leading Portia to storm out, declaring she would borrow from Mom to pay it back. It turned out she had already used the $100,000 she inherited to settle some of her debts. However, still short, she came to me, seeking more money. Learning about the contents of the safe triggered her actions, resulting in this entire mess. No wonder her husband was furious. In the end, my sister, with a fractured leg, was hospitalized, and her husband started talking about divorce. Despite her protests, he brought divorce papers to the hospital, and she had no choice but to sign. Now she lies in her hospital bed, stunned by the unfolding events. I noticed a part-time job magazine next to her, suggesting she's contemplating working part-time to pay off her debts. As for me, I decided to move back to my parents' home amid all the commotion. Concerned about my mother and another significant reason, I found out I'm pregnant. After discussing it with my husband, we decided to move back home and have my mother assist us with childcare. Although I wish I could have shared the news of my pregnancy with my father while he was alive, I'm certain he would be happy for us. So, I'm looking forward to giving birth to a healthy baby. This is the last present I will ever give you. My husband shoves divorce papers to me. I've decided to marry someone else. So thank you for being a cash dispenser until now. The guy I have been with for so many years turns out to be a horrible person. This is a story of my revenge. My name is Jessica. I'm turning 50 this year. In fact, tomorrow is a little special day. I'll be living in debt for a long time and will finally finish paying it off. My husband Lance and I have worked really hard together. We got married 20 years ago. I was 30 and he was 35. He ran a liquor store that he inherited from his parents who had passed away. I, on the other hand, was an office worker. We met through an acquaintance and started dating with marriage in mind. I had one concern back then. What if he asked me to run the store with him? I was working as a financial consultant who advised on insurance and investment to individual and corporate clients at the time. I was getting paid better than average 30-year-olds and loved my job. I was studying for certification to take my career to the next level when he proposed to me. He said, "I know you have been working hard to get the certification. I want to support you in any way I can. I have enough staff at the store so I can manage it myself. You should pursue your dreams." His assurance was a catalyst for my decision to marry him. He was benevolent and always on my side. I truly wanted to build a life with such a man. As we agreed in the beginning, he focused on his business, and I focused on my work. We thought that our marriage was going well. About a year into it, he went to work, and I was spending my day off at home. When I was vacuuming under the bed, it caught a lot of papers. It had been less than 6 months since we moved in. I wondered why there was such clutter. I picked up a crumpled piece of paper and opened it. The header in bold letters jumped into my eyes. Reminder of payment. The total amount of the debt under Lance's name was $200,000. $200,000 was not $2,000, is it? My head started spinning. Why did he hide such a large amount of debt from me? I questioned him as soon as he got home that day. "What is this debt? What's going on?" "No, it's not what you think. It was left to me by my parents." That was not a personal debt, but rather on his liquor store. It was made by his parents, and when he took over the business, it also came along. It was secured by the land and the house we lived in, so he had no intention to renounce the inheritance. I understood that it was not his personal debt, but it was not something that could be left unattended. "But this is a payment reminder. Aren't you paying back every month?" "I am, but sales fluctuate from month to month. Sometimes I can't pay them back during the slow month. I have to pay my staff first, so I've asked them to wait." That's when the letter came. At first, his explanation sounded to make sense, but it was definitely not a good idea to delay payment. The letter included the words "final notice." "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to freak out. Don't worry though. Business is on track, and we haven't been evicted from the house, right?" "That's true, but..." I looked at him anxiously. Then he mentioned something unexpected. "If you're so worried, why don't you help me pay it off? You are making quite a lot, aren't you?" I wasn't comfortable with where he was going. It was not my store, and a husband and a wife were supposed to help each other. "My debt is also yours. That's a bit sudden. Are you okay if my store went out of business? Many people would suffer if it was gone, you know." I guess he was right. His store had become an indispensable part of the community. It was located in the suburbs where there weren't many shops or supermarkets around. He was also selling fresh foods such as meat and fish and offered a home delivery service. I visited the shop several times, and it was always busy. Some customers stated that they were so grateful to have it in the neighborhood. Please, honey, I'll be focused on keeping my business rolling. Please help me pay off my debts. I respected the way he took his work seriously and devoted himself. I didn't want to see his store disappear. I didn't want that to happen for sure. Being married means that we support each other at all times. If you are struggling, it seems only natural for me to help him. Okay, I'll repay back as much as I can every month from my salary. You can concentrate on managing the store. I could help financially, but only he could run it. I was happy that he relied on me above all else. However, it was the beginning of a change in him. About 3 years had passed since I took over his debt. He often came home late. What were you doing until this late? You reek of alcohol. I just had a few drinks with my customers, honey. Did you make a payment this month? For some reason, he sounded condescending. I did last week. Why? The store depends on you. You'd better keep paying on time. Whenever he got drunk those days, he gave me an order. I had taken it as nonsense from a drunkard, but it started to prick my nerves when he did it repeatedly. He made it sound like it was normal for me to pay back his debt. By the way, Matt has a third kid now. I envy him. Matt was his friend from high school. He had his own business, just like Lance. His wife also worked in the store with him. I've been wanting to talk to you about that. I told him what I had been keeping to myself. Don't you think it's time for us to start a family? His reaction was very cold. What, baby? My business has just started picking up, and we are still in debt. How can we be so irresponsible? That was his stance. I held back my annoyance. Matt has 3 children now, right? We can manage one too. His parents are still well, and his wife works in the store. They are different from us. I couldn't counter that. I always thought that I would have children when I got married. My dream was crushed easily, so until I pay off all your debts, we can't have a baby. Well, I guess that's how it's going to be. If you make a lot of money and pay off studies quickly, I will think about it. His mean smile disgusted me, but I felt impatient to pay off the debts as soon as possible. How blind I was. Even though it was an irrational demand, I was still occupied with the thought of starting a family and didn't even think about it. From then on, I worked tirelessly for Lance. I actively obtained qualifications, took promotional exams, and secured a salary increase. I started earning much more than women my age. I even made advance payments, but the debt didn't disappear so easily. I turned 40 before I knew it and had to give up on having children. I thought to myself that I still had my husband and thought he was enough. He relied on me, and I could do anything for him. As long as I still believed that, I remained happy. Lance started coming home later and later as the days went by. He sometimes came back in the morning. I was working in the store, and it was morning when I realized it. I had to go out with a customer, and the next thing I knew, the sun was out. When I saw him working so hard to protect the store, I felt that I had to do my best as a wife too. We were on the same boat, sailing for a better future together. The months and years went by, and the day finally arrived. I was going to make the last payment the next day. For the sake of the debt, I had to pass on all sorts of luxuries. I didn't need to do so anymore. I could finally spend my hard-earned money the way I wanted. I realized that ever since I got married, I had been thinking too much about money. We had never taken a vacation or even dined at a nice restaurant. We were still in our 50s. I hoped to finally enjoy such things from then on. On the day the last payment was due, I took a day off. I prepared a more opulent dinner than usual, complete with a bottle of wine and Lance's favorite chocolate cake, intending to celebrate a debt-free life together. When he returned from work, I laid everything out on the table, remarking, "Finally, it feels like it's been a long time." But the last 20 years have gone by so fast, haven't they, honey? His trembling and lowered head made me wonder if he was crying from happiness. However, to my shock, he burst into laughter in a way I had never heard before. "What the hell is going on? Are you okay?" My supposed husband declared something outrageous. You are dismissed now. I'm grateful to you for the past 20 years. Thanks to you paying off all my debt, I'm a free man. Great job. I don't need you anymore. What are you talking about? I genuinely had no clue. He pulled out something from his bag. This is my last present to you. Bold letters of a divorce petition stabbed my eyes. Proudly, he continued, I've decided to marry someone else, so you are no longer of any use to me. Thanks for being my cash dispenser until now. You're getting remarried? Have you been cheating on me all this time? I recalled his habitual late returns, citing work or socializing. While I toiled to pay off his debt, he was nowhere to be found. His expression remained smug. I will never read that unfaithful. I have already found the next potential wife. I want to divorce you and marry her. That's why I have been waiting for you to clear my debt. Tears welled up at the absurdity. The feast I had prepared blurred before my saddened eyes. Get the hell out of here. He handed me the divorce papers. My blood boiled faster than I could feel sadness or despair. Okay, but you won't regret it. I forced out my voice. No, I won't. Why would I regret divorcing an old hag like you? Old hag? If I were hurt, he would be an old fart. Did he think he was still young? His misconception was so ridiculous that I regained composure and accepted the divorce papers. I'm going to take this with me for now, and I'll be in touch. I packed my belongings and left the house. How could my 20 years of marriage come to such an easy end? Finally alone, I shed tears of emptiness and frustration. Later, I asked my attorney for a divorce agreement, sending it to Lance. I also requested a background report on his bride-to-be. Shortly after, he called me. Hey, Jessica, what the hell is this document? He sounded furious. I could imagine his face turning bright red even over the phone. Contrasting his fury, I remained calm. That is a divorce agreement. What about it? I know what it is. What I'm talking about is this loan agreement. Why do I have to pay you back? He sounded distraught, yelling, This is crazy. This is not right. Referring to the repayment of the loan between spouses during the marriage, he protested against returning the money I paid on his behalf. This is ridiculous. You decided to do it out of your goodwill, didn't you? Why are you digging up the past? What do you mean? I did it as your wife. If we divorce, that's a different story. Regret hit him. He just realized it. When he asked for a divorce, I immediately thought of making him repay my head. My profession involved dealings with insurance and investments, giving me contacts with experienced attorneys. I consulted them right away. The total, including interest, was a little over $300,000. I was determined to have him pay me back precisely that. That was all I asked for. He grasped the seriousness, seeing the name of a locally famous attorney on the document. Ludicrously, he said, You know that I don't have much money. Sell the store to fund it then. If I do that, I won't have anything left. You're only 55. You could still find a job if you wanted to. Give me a break. The conversation made no sense. I wanted to hang up, but there was one last thing to check. How's it going with your new bride-to-be? None of your business. I burst out in laughter. It seemed like he was going through a lot. Good luck. I was about to hang up. Wait a minute. I've decided not to marry her. We can start over. For some reason, he pleaded with me. I yelled my last words and hung up. Start over? Don't kid yourself. I don't want you. I had been married to such a man for 20 years. Did I look more ridiculous than him in the eyes of others? I respected him until the divorce. I had watched him work hard for the store and his customers. 20 years later, I realized he was just a fool. The mentioned remarriage started with innocent flirtation with a part-time university student, Melissa. You are so cute, Melissa. Will you be my wife? She played along, jokingly replying, Well, I would think about it if you let me be a full-time housewife. The truth was, he believed she was serious. Marrying a man nearly 40 years her senior seemed like a mere joke to her. It turned horrifying when he persistently pressed her to marry him, leading her parents to intervene and obtain a restraining order against him. Reading the private investigation report, I laughed so hard I hyperventilated. When he came home late, I assumed he was working hard, unaware of the truth. Instead, he was hitting on young girls at bars and strip joints, boasting, "I'm surprisingly popular with young girls. I'm a salesman, so I have this easy-to-talk-to aura and get along with them. And I'm told that I look younger. Don't you think so?" The girls apparently cringed at his comments. With no use for his older wife and viewing me only as a cash dispenser, his misconceived self-image turned him into a somewhat laughable stalker who almost got in trouble with the police. Perhaps it would have been better if he had cheated on me. Unfortunately, he couldn't even find a mistress. The reason behind his pursuit of a young girl was his friend Matt having a grandchild. Matt recounted, "As soon as he saw my grandchild, he said he wanted to have a child himself. I scolded him, saying he shouldn't say such a thing. You have been paying his debt for him." He was absolutely mortified. "I'm glad I didn't spend my golden years with that man," I muttered. My divorce finalized, and despite unclear property division, he gave up due to my attorney's reputation. I wondered how such a gutless person had stayed in business. He sold the store to pay me back. Fortunately, just before the sale, his employees abandoned him. Customers frowned at him for giving up a family business. When they learned the reason was to pay his ex-wife, shock spread through the community. He got what he deserved when he demanded a divorce. A true story that sounded like a comedy circulated. Even if he hadn't sold the store, the bad publicity would have affected his business. Selling before bankruptcy was probably a blessing. The money wasn't enough, so he still works part-time to pay me back. Sometimes he messages, "It was all my fault. Can we get back together?" Even after blocking, he calls from different phones. "If you contact your ex-wife any further, we'll file a restraining order," warned my attorney. The calls stopped. He is terrified of the attorney. Guess what I do now? I'm a marriage counselor. Turning 50, I joined my friend's matchmaking business. I quit my previous job, helping singles find a match, offering advice on finances, insurance, etc. Couples appreciating frank discussions from the beginning increased our membership. Having been through a lot, I don't want them to make the same mistakes I did. Though my salary is lower, I enjoy helping others be happy every day. I found happiness after getting rid of my ex-husband. Today, I'm a bridge to someone else's happiness.
My younger sister, Lois, called me just before our mom's funeral. She hadn't replied to any of my messages, so I was surprised to hear from her. She told me she'd just come back from Hawaii with Keith and brought me some chocolates. I was really upset because she hadn't bothered to respond to me earlier, so I ended up yelling at her in front of everyone at the funeral. I said something hurtful about her taking my husband, which was a terrible thing to say. Lois was confused and just asked, "What?" before I hung up on her. I turned off my phone and tried to calm down as I sat with the rest of the family. My name's Emily, and I just turned 38. I grew up in a family of 4. My parents, my sister Lois, who's 6 years younger, and me. My parents were pretty strict, especially with me being the oldest. But they always spoiled Lois because she was charming. Whenever she wanted something, she'd flash a smile and say, "Emily, I want this," and I usually give in. Unfortunately, this didn't change even as she got older, and she became quite a troublesome sister. Dad passed away 8 years ago from an illness, and about 6 months ago, Mom got a terminal diagnosis. She was in and out of the hospital. I married Keith, a colleague, 2 years ago and moved out to an apartment near my office. For the past 6 months, I've been driving an hour each way to take care of Mom between work. Lois moved back home and quit her job a year ago after a breakup. Even though she lived there, she kept pushing the caregiving responsibility onto me, saying I was better at it. So I took a month off work to look after Mom. But despite my efforts, she passed away 2 days ago. And where was Lois? She'd gone off to Hawaii a week before Mom's passing. I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't listen. At the funeral, after the priest finished speaking, friends and family started paying their respects. It was touching to see not just relatives, but also many of Mom's friends there to grieve. Some colleagues from my company came too. "I'm sorry for your loss," one of them said. "Thank you. I really appreciate you letting me take time off to be with my mom in her final days," I replied. "He's actually my father-in-law, the president of the company where I work. He's been really understanding about everything I've been going through and has supported me a lot." "But where's Keith? I haven't spotted him here yet." "Well, he's been overseas on a business trip since last week, and I haven't been able to reach him," I explained. "Oh, I see. I'll ask the sales manager about it," I said, trying to figure out where Keith was. Keith and I work in different departments because of the big company he runs. He's always busy with sales and often away on business trips. I tried to understand, but it was hard not having him here during such a tough time. I was worried about handling everything alone, especially with no contact from him or my sister. Meanwhile, my father-in-law made the effort to be there for the funeral. Despite his busy schedule, his support meant the world to me, and it almost brought me to tears. I had to hold him back as we rode in the limo to the crematory with the rest of the family. When I turned my phone back on, I found almost 30 voicemails, mostly from Lois. "Answer your phone. You can't just make up some ridiculous lies because you're upset that I took Keith from you," she yelled in her messages. "She took Keith from me?" I questioned, trying to recall if Lois had hinted at something like that during her call before the funeral. But I was too busy dealing with the mourners to fully grasp what she was saying. Lois and Keith having an affair? That couldn't be true, could it? I felt a sudden rush of anxiety and confusion. Was Keith really on a trip with her? As I hurriedly checked the voicemail, I found several messages from my husband. "I'm so sorry, but you're strong. You can handle this on your own. But Lois, I need to be there for her. We need to end things," he said in a message that felt like it came from a soap opera script. Hearing those words, I couldn't help but mutter, "I wish I hadn't heard that." Finding out that my husband and sister were having an affair and enjoying themselves in Hawaii during my mother's funeral felt like a cruel blow. "You need to come right away if you want to say your final goodbye to Mom. We're already heading to the crematory," I reluctantly informed my sister over the phone. "That's not funny. Stop lying. You're just bitter because I took Keith from you," she shot back. "But it's true. You must be upset about losing your husband." "Yes, he's the next company president and wealthy." "I get it, Emily, but there are lies and then there are terrible lies. You're an adult. You should know better," she retorted. "I never thought I'd hear that from you," I replied. I was surprised though. I had no idea that you and Keith were cheating. I could almost hear the smirk in Lois's voice. She'd always loved playing tricks on me since we were kids and would laugh when I fell for them. I sighed in frustration. "Anyway, this isn't the time for this. If you want to say your final goodbye to Mom, come now," I urged. "I'm tired of that lie." "So why do you have cheese?" Lois asked abruptly. "Ask his father," I replied, throwing the question back at them. I could hear them discussing on the other end, probably caught off guard by me bringing up his father. Eventually my husband, who seemed to be with Lois, took the phone. "Emily, is that true?" he asked. "If you don't believe it, do whatever you want. I'm hanging up now," I stated firmly before ending the call. Soon we arrived at the crematory. It was my last chance to say goodbye to Mom, and my mind was in turmoil with the whirlwind of emotions from the past few days and the pain of losing my mother. I felt lost and overwhelmed, tears streaming down my cheeks. Seeing me like this, one of my relatives comforted me, saying, "Your mom would surely be grateful to you, Emily, for taking such good care of her until the end." I stood in front of my mother's casket, bidding her my final farewell. "Mom, thank you for everything. I'm going to miss you so much," I whispered. Just as her casket was being carried out for cremation, there was sudden commotion. "Wait a minute. Where's Mom?" My sister and husband burst in, their voices loud and frantic. Lois tried to hold onto the casket as it disappeared behind the doors, but they closed abruptly, leaving her wailing in despair, with Keith looking stunned. "We should move along now. We're disturbing others," I said, trying to keep calm. "Why didn't you tell me, Emily? I didn't get to see Mom at the end. It's your fault." Lois accused me, her voice filled with anguish. "My fault?" I echoed, bewildered by her accusation. "Absolutely. If it was this serious, you should have told me earlier. You never said anything," Lois accused, her voice filled with frustration. I couldn't help but feel exasperated. How many times had I explained our mother's health condition to her? Every time she'd just brush it off, saying, "I don't know how to handle any of this. I'll leave it to you, Emily." That's right, this all happened because you didn't explain how serious Mom's condition was. It's your fault, Lois continued to blame me. Even Keith, my husband, joined in, pointing fingers at me. I stared at them in disbelief. "Then what were you two doing all this time?" I demanded, my voice rising with anger. They gasped, finally falling silent. "If you can't say it, I will. You were off on a fun-filled romantic getaway in Hawaii together, weren't you?" As the relatives murmured, clearly taken aback by the unfolding drama, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their disbelief. For so long, whenever they asked, "What's wrong with Lois?" or "Isn't Keith coming?" I've been making excuses for them, trying to shield them from judgment. "Mom, I'm sorry. I really wanted to say goodbye to you more peacefully," I whispered in my mind, seeking her forgiveness. Gathering my resolve, I knew I had to clear the air. "When did this affair start exactly? You both knew I was on leave caring for Mom, right? I was struggling, asking for help countless times, but all you did was have fun together, didn't you?" I questioned, my voice tinged with frustration and hurt. "Enough. It's all your fault, Emily. You didn't keep Keith close enough," Lois snapped back. "What's that supposed to mean?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. "You need to prioritize your husband more. He's been feeling bored at home because all you talk about is work and caregiving." "Poor Keith," Lois chided, her words dripping with disdain. "Oh, so that's what he said," I retorted, shooting a glare at Keith, who quickly averted his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "Emily, you managed to marry a wealthy future company president, but you've become conceited. That's why he was drawn to me. It's always been like this with you," Lois continued, her tone accusatory. In reality, Lois had a history of stealing my boyfriends back in high school and university. The only time she didn't succeed was with Keith because she was already with her own boyfriend then. What a disappointment. "From now on, I'll be with Keith and become the future president's wife. So break up with him," Lois demanded. "Fine, you can have Keith. I'll divorce him," I declared, my resolve firm. By then, I was beyond caring. When I decided to marry Keith, I had no clue he was the president's son. He worked at a regional branch and later joined my department at headquarters. Keith was charming, easygoing, and quickly became part of our team. As we grew closer, I developed feelings for him. We started dating, and when he proposed, I was thrilled. It wasn't until I visited his parents' house that I learned his father was the company president. It was quite a shock. "So promise me you won't come back later begging to avoid the divorce," Keith pleaded. "I won't do that," I assured him. "Are you really sure about leaving me?" he pressed. "Yes, I am," I replied firmly. "If you leave me, no man will want to marry a workaholic like you." "You know that, right?" he warned. "I'll live my life as I please on my own terms. But for today, please just say your final goodbye to Mom properly," I pleaded with him. Keith and Lois exchanged knowing looks, smirking as if they had won some sort of victory. The relatives watched on, their brows furrowed, clearly disturbed by the unfolding situation. "I'm truly sorry for the scene you all witnessed," I apologized to my relatives, feeling a pang of guilt. I heard Lois whispering to me, "Always playing the good girl. I hate this about you. I've tolerated a lot from her because she's my younger sister, but I've had enough. I won't consider her family anymore. I'm divorcing Keith, and now I feel like I have no family left. All I can do is prepare myself for that reality." I bit my lip, feeling the weight of it all. 2 weeks have passed since then. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Keith, packed up everything, and settled into a new condo near the office. I've even put my parents' house up for sale. There's nothing left tying me to the past. Lois has moved in with Keith as I moved out. Keith and I have already finalized our divorce papers and submitted them to the courthouse. I'm sure they're happily starting their new life together now. Now that I'm done with Mom's paperwork, it's time for revenge. "Watch over me, Mom," I whispered to her portrait, a determined smile on my face. "Enjoy your honeymoon phase while you can, you too." The next day, as I went back to the office to sort out my job reinstatement, my phone buzzed incessantly with voicemails piling up. "Hey, what's happening? We're divorced, right? Why am I being asked to pay $30,000? Keith's voice sounded confused and agitated. Worried they might show up uninvited at my new place, I suggested meeting at a local diner to discuss. Once we sat down, Keith was furious, practically frothing at the mouth. "I got some legal document. What's going on? We're already divorced, aren't we?" he yelled. "Exactly. I'm just as confused," Lois chimed in, equally puzzled. I had instructed my lawyer to claim $40,000 from Keith as my share of the property and $30,000 from Lois for her portion of our mother's medical care coverage. The documents must have arrived at their places. It was something they should have anticipated, but evidently didn't. I was exasperated. "You just need to pay what you owe," I insisted firmly. "That's not fair. Don't think you can get away with this. I've suffered a lot of emotional distress." "Should I sue you for that too?" Keith threatened angrily. "Emotional distress? You cheated, plain and simple. So pay up," I retorted, refusing to back down. They fell silent, perhaps realizing they couldn't argue with the law. Then, after a pause, Lois turned her gaze towards me. "So Emily, it's all about the money for you after all," she remarked coldly. "Fine, I'll let Keith handle the payment. If I borrow from my dad, we can easily come up with the $70,000. Keith, I know you don't have any savings." "Lois, are you really okay being with a guy who has no money?" I interjected. "Keith will become president soon, then he'll be wealthy. It's just a matter of time," Lois replied confidently. "Oh Lois, you're after the money too, aren't you?" I couldn't help but comment, feeling a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "No, I have plenty of love. Dad's been saying for a while that he'll retire at 65. So in 2 years, I'll be president," Keith asserted confidently. "Really? That would be something," I replied, trying to hide my skepticism. "I'm definitely going to be president. I'm his only son," Keith affirmed. "I wonder." I couldn't help but chuckle, my doubt seeping through. "I can't believe this. Has she lost it?" Lois muttered, clearly annoyed. But the real revenge plan I had in store was just getting started. "Keith, you've been taking a lot of time off work, citing family funerals, right?" I asked casually. "Well, my mother-in-law is family too," Keith replied, trying to justify his absences. "That's true, but the company is aware of what you've actually been up to," I continued, watching Keith's expression carefully. "Huh? What do you mean?" he asked, clearly confused. "Do you know that your father attended Mom's funeral?" I dropped the bombshell, knowing I had purposely kept this information from Keith and Lois. "That was you," Keith realized, his eyes widening in shock. "You didn't do any caregiving at all. You have the nerve to lie about taking family leave for that. And you've gone off on several business trips with Lois instead, right?" "I've reported that too," I stated matter-of-factly. "How did you find out?" Keith stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Lois has been posting photos on social media, showing where she's been and when. And there were a few pictures with you in them. Quite shocking," I revealed. "Huh? You knew about my social media?" Keith asked, surprised. "It's the same account you had back in high school." "Of course I'd know," I replied. Lois shifted uncomfortably, and Keith seemed stunned by my revelations. "Wait, does Dad really know everything?" he asked, looking bewildered. "Just as my mother was family to you, your father considered her family too. So of course he knew about the funeral, as it should be reported to the company. Even after the funeral, he reached out to me several times to check on me, so I reported everything to him. And he's quite furious. He also made it clear he has no intention of making you the next president," I explained, dropping another bombshell. "Huh? But I'm his son," Keith protested, disbelief written all over his face. He said he doesn't recall ever mentioning our company follows hereditary succession. He also made it clear he doesn't need a son who would act so disloyally. I informed them, relishing their shock. "So Keith won't be the president?" Lois asked, her voice filled with disbelief. As I watched their pale faces, I decided to push them even further. "And just so you know, I'll be taking over as president starting next month." "Huh?" Keith and Lois exclaimed simultaneously. "In fact, I've just received the official notice from the president and my superiors at the company. I've been formally appointed as the new president," I announced confidently. "There's no way they'd make you president," Keith protested, clearly rattled. "If you think it's a lie, why don't you call your father and ask?" I challenged him. Keith hurriedly dialed his father's number, while Lois, his new wife, watched anxiously. "So Emily is really going to be the president? It's true?" So I won't become the president's wife? If I had known, I wouldn't have taken you from Emily. Lois lamented, her voice tinged with regret. But you just said you loved me, Keith muttered, stunned by the turn of events. That was considering your assets, I clarified firmly. What did you say? Keith's voice rose in confusion and frustration. Unable to tolerate their squabbling any longer, I stood up. If you two want to argue, do it somewhere else. And I'll be expecting the payment. Thank you. Wait, please don't leave me. Please, sis, support me, Keith pleaded desperately. I evaded their outstretched hands and walked away. Eventually, the couple ended up divorcing. Keith was demoted by his father and eventually resigned from his job. Now he works multiple part-time jobs every day to pay off his debts to me. Lois, on the other hand, is reportedly working at a bar at night. Initially, she seemed to be doing well, but she fell victim to a bad situation after being deceived by a dishonest man. Meanwhile, I've become the president. Admittedly, it's for a small company that operates as a subsidiary in the caregiving industry, established based on the proposal I submitted during my caregiving leave. However, the caregiving sector is projected to grow in the future, and I'm determined to excel. I'll give it my all from here on out. Kate, what are you doing up so late? Where are you? I'm on a spa vacation with Luna. Oh, I understand now. I discovered everything when my husband lied to me. I'm Kate, a 30-year-old office worker. I've been married to my husband Daniel for 6 years, and we have a 6-year-old daughter named Luna. Since we got married when I was pregnant, Luna is growing up to be a wonderful child. Mom, I can help you. Really? Can you roll the hamburger patties like this? Yes, I can do that. There you go. Oh, Luna, you're really good at this. Here's one for Dad and one for Mom. This one is for Daddy. He's had a tough day at work, so he gets the big one. He might be so happy he'll cry. While I was having fun cooking with my daughter, my husband came out of the bath. Luna ran to him and said, "I made your hamburger, Daddy." He was happy too and said, "Really? I can't wait to eat it." We were enjoying our time as a happy family, or so I thought. Both my husband and I work, but he has a shorter commute and less overtime than I do. Because of this, I often ask him to pick up our daughter from kindergarten. Recently, he's been coming home late due to work, so I've had to pick her up and bring her home myself. My daughter said sadly on the way home from kindergarten, "I wonder if Daddy doesn't like me anymore." I think she misses him because he used to pick her up, and now he comes home very late. Sometimes he doesn't even get to see her. I gently patted her head, even though it hurt me to see her upset. Daddy is working really hard for you right now. Once things calm down, he'll be able to spend more time with you. Really? Yes, so let's support him together with Mommy. Okay, I'll cook for him. She's such a sweet girl. I'm looking forward to the day when we can all eat together as a family again. But a few months later, my husband was still working long hours. He came home very late. Before, he used to be home by the last train, but now he's coming home at 2-3 a.m. or even taking the first train in the morning. Are you sure it's all work? If you're just out drinking, I wish you'd come home and spend time with Luna. I couldn't take it anymore and told my husband how I felt. My daughter has been missing her dad for a month and looks really sad. My husband didn't like what I said and got upset. Huh? What's with the tone? I go to work parties for the family's sake. It's unfair to accuse me like that. Okay, I'm sorry, but you need to understand that Luna is feeling lonely because she doesn't get to spend time with you. After I said this, he went quiet and went straight to the bedroom. Since then, things have been awkward between us. Then, I was told by my company that I needed to go on a short business trip. There were a lot of things I needed to check in person, so I might have to stay 1 or even 2 nights. My first concern was what to do with my daughter. My parents lived too far away to help. I would have to ask my husband, but with how busy he's been, I wasn't sure if I could rely on him. Still, I had no other choice, so I waited for him to come home. I wondered if he had been out drinking again, and sure enough, he came home late. It was well past midnight, and around 3 o'clock, I heard the door unlock. Welcome home. Kate, I didn't know you were still up. My husband was surprised to find me waiting for him. I had stayed up because I needed to talk. Huh? Talk? He came home drunk, his face red, but now he looked pale as he sat down at the dining table and stared at me. So, what do you want to talk about? It's not a big deal. But he seemed unusually upset. I told him about my upcoming business trip. It was short notice, but I had to leave in 2 weeks on Friday. I'd need to stay at least one night, and possibly 2 if there was a lot to do. I couldn't help but notice how strange he was acting. Can you take care of Luna while I'm away? I know you're busy with work, I asked, feeling apologetic. My husband looked relieved. Oh, that's totally fine. Really? Yeah, are you okay with work? Of course I'm busy, but I need to put you and Luna first. How about I take a day off and take Luna on an overnight hot spring trip? I haven't had a chance to spend time with her lately. I'm sure Luna would love that. I was relieved to hear my husband say that. It showed he really cared about our family. I had been worried lately about whether he truly cared, but it seemed my concerns were unfounded. The next day, while taking my daughter to kindergarten, I told her the news. What? Daddy and I can go on the hot spring trip together. She was so excited and happy, which made me happy too. When the day of my business trip arrived, it went better than I expected. It was my first trip since having Luna, but everything went smoothly. The people I met were very helpful and made sure everything was in order for me to check. The work went so smoothly that I finished by 7 p.m. that day. I thought, since I'm done, I might as well go home tonight. I wasn't sure if I'd be staying 1 night or 2 without knowing the status of my work. I planned to spend the first night at a manga cafe instead of a hotel to avoid cancellation fees. If I got a ticket, I could catch the last train home. I wanted to spend a relaxing evening at home if I could, so I hurried to the train and headed home. I imagined my husband and daughter enjoying a delicious meal at a hotel. The thought of my daughter's happy face made me feel better. I decided that I'd wake up early the next morning, clean the house thoroughly, and surprise them both. With that in mind, I arrived home around 11 p.m. I wondered why the light was on in the living room. Did my husband forget to turn it off? Frowning, I walked inside and found my daughter curled up on the sofa, crying. Oh, Luna, what's wrong? Mommy, why are you crying? Where's Daddy? My husband was nowhere to be seen. I was so upset I immediately started asking Luna questions. Daddy left this morning without me. What? What is going on? What was my husband thinking? I was furious with my husband's crazy behavior, but I needed to calm Luna down first. I hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry. I know you were lonely being alone so late at night. As I held her and stroked her head, she seemed to relax and started to fall asleep in my arms, exhausted from being scared and anxious. I gently carried her to bed, then went back to the living room to call my husband. Kate, why are you calling at this hour? Where are you? I'm on a spa trip with Luna. Why are you whispering? Luna is already tired and asleep. I don't want to wake her. Oh, I see. I'm sure she's asleep, but she's not with me. I realized my husband had lied to me. I was close to losing my temper, but I managed to stay calm. How's the trip going? It's great. I wouldn't mind staying another night. The food is good, and the hot springs are wonderful. Well, why don't we stay one more night then? I said that, and my husband sounded unsure. But Kate, you're coming home after one night, right? If you do, you'll be alone, so Luna and I will come back tomorrow. I knew exactly what he was worried about. He was afraid that if I got home first, I'd discover he had left our daughter alone. So I decided to lie. Well, I've got a lot of work to do and we'll be home later than planned. I'll need to stay another night, so don't worry about me. Enjoy your trip as long as you like. He didn't question my lie at all. Really? Then I'll extend the trip for one more night. Luna is really excited. I need to give her more time with her daddy since I haven't been able to spend much time with her recently. Okay, just make sure to call me when you know when you'll be back. My daughter's excited. What are you talking about? She was curled up and crying by herself. I held back my anger and ended the call. I was determined to make him face the consequences for the pain he caused Luna. I called my parents and explained everything. Then I quickly started packing my things and contacted a moving company. Luckily, I found a company that could come that day, so I arranged for them to move my stuff out. My daughter looked confused as she saw several men coming in and taking things out of the house. I need to talk to her. Luna, I've decided that we're not going to live with your dad anymore. I don't want you to be sad anymore. I'm going to quit my job and move in with Grandma and Grandpa so I can spend more time with you. But if we move to Grandma and Grandpa's house, you won't be able to see your dad. What do you want to do? I knew it was tough to ask such a question to a 6-year-old, but I wanted to know her thoughts. Will I never see Daddy again? If you really want to see him, I can arrange for you to visit him occasionally, but he won't be living with us anymore. I wanted my daughter to have the chance to see her father if she wanted, even though I doubted he would make time for her after the divorce, especially after leaving her alone at home while he went on vacation. As I was thinking about this, my daughter seemed to come to a decision. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'm going with you, Mommy. Daddy probably doesn't care about me." I cried and asked him, "Why are you leaving me?" But he didn't answer and just left. I was deeply hurt that he made our 6-year-old daughter feel this way just so he could go on a vacation with his mistress. I felt he was a terrible man, a lousy father, and worthless. I regretted leaving my daughter with him and going on a business trip if it meant this would happen. "Luna, I'm so sorry for making you so sad." I hugged Luna tightly, and we started working on the move. I decided to leave the rest of the issues with my husband behind and focus on settling in with my parents. A few hours later, my husband called. "Hey, why is all your stuff missing? And Luna's things too. What's going on?" "Don't you know why?" "Of course not. Luna's crying because her stuff is gone. Do you really think you can keep lying to me after all this?" "That's strange. Luna is now eating noodles that my mother made." "What? We already know you left your 6-year-old daughter alone at home while you went on a trip with someone else. How could you do that? You're not fit to be a father. If I hadn't come back that day, you could have traumatized Luna for life." My husband was stunned and silent, clearly not expecting me to be with Luna already. "Anyway, you left your daughter alone just to be with another woman. I can't stay married to you. I want a divorce." "Divorce? Oh no, please reconsider." "I can't. I don't want to see you anymore." While we were on the phone, I heard the doorbell ringing repeatedly. Oh God, who could it be at a time like this? My husband sounded annoyed, but I knew who it was. "Looks like they've arrived. Dad and Mom." I heard my husband's voice on the phone, followed by my father-in-law yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" And then a loud commotion. Well, that's the start. I guessed it was the sound of him getting beaten up. My father-in-law had practiced judo for many years and was now an advisor at a university. He adored his granddaughter, Luna. When I told him about my husband's infidelity and how he left Luna alone, he was furious. He said he was going to teach my husband a lesson. I decided to ask him for a favor. "What the hell do you think you're doing with your own daughter? I didn't raise you to be such an..." I could hear my stepfather's angry voice repeating his thoughts. Even though we lived in an apartment, I was glad we were on the first floor. If there were people living below, they might have complained. But since we'd already moved out, it didn't concern me anymore. My father-in-law really laid into my husband, both physically and mentally. After that, the divorce settlement went smoothly. I got full custody, and the alimony and child support were paid in one lump sum. I even managed to get alimony from the mistress. My husband tried to remarry the mistress, but she wasn't interested in a serious relationship and left him because he was too serious. At work, he's embarrassed about his affair. He's been disowned by his parents, dumped by his mistress, and now his daughter is with me. He's left with nothing but his own mess, and frankly, he deserves it. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying happy times with my daughter at my parents' house. My parents are farmers, so I help them out. My daughter loves eating fresh vegetables from the farm and enjoys being surrounded by nature. I'm committed to putting her first in my life. Leaving a young daughter alone for an affair? He should have faced legal consequences. I hope Luna isn't too heartbroken, but it feels good that my husband finally lost everything he had. Kate, I hope you and your daughter stay happy and continue to find joy together.